Part 13. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 121. At this moment, the eyes of the monks on Kanghai Peak were involuntarily attracted to her. No matter how low-key Yelingxian is on weekdays, under the current circumstances, she can't keep a low profile no matter what. Yu also stared closely at the beam of light and the delicate purple shadow of the girl in the beam. For some reason, he always felt that the medicinal fragrance emanating from Yelingxian at this moment seemed to have a familiar feeling. I seem to have smelled this medicinal fragrance somewhere, Yu murmured in his heart. Its soaring dragon beard, an old voice sounded slowly inside his body. Long Tang beard. Yu was stunned for a moment, and then, as if he thought of something, he stared at Musian's back. When Musian was at Chenexai auction house, he robbed him of 2 auction items, one was a bronze piece, and the other was a dragon beard. The bronze piece was given to Bairuoxi by Musian, making Bairuoxi now a top genius. The dragon beard that I was attracted to at the beginning was not only given to Lingxian as a gift to win her heart, but is now actually activated by Lingxian. Yu suppressed the anger in his heart, but involuntarily tightened his fist on Yurong Dan, watching Yelingxian slowly float up to the top of the mountain from the pillar of light. She opened her eyes, and her magnificent eyes calmly looked at the people present who were watching her silently. Then, when he noticed the gaze of a certain young man in the crowd, his originally calm eyes seemed to soften a little. Wearing small and exquisite short boots, she walked gracefully. "Does it look like the retreat is over?" Musian looked at Yelingxian's approaching figure and said with a smile. Yelingxian said softly, with a shy but joyful smile on her face, "Thanks to you." Previously, the spirit dragon took her to a pool that existed in ancient times, and in that pool, she could feel that the dragon's whiskers hidden on her body seemed to be recovering. Not only the dragon beard, but also his own physique is also quite close to the pool. After that, Linglong asked her to take a bath by herself and left. All of this is because of Musian, otherwise, with a personality like Linglong's, it would be impossible for him to take the initiative to lead outsiders into the pool. No matter how strong the power behind Yelingxian is, it doesn't mean much to Linglong. After all, Linling doesn't care about worldly relationships. In a sense, Linling is very similar to Yu. The only difference is that Linling is a girl, and she is cute and strong. Therefore, even if she doesn't take the initiative to get close to others, others will try to get close to her. A natural spirit body, should I say that she really deserves to be his daughter? For such a talent, I am afraid there will be many major peaks competing for it this time. At this time, an emotional voice came from mid-air. All the disciples looked up and immediately clasped their fists respectfully. First seed. The person hanging in mid-air at this time is surprisingly the leader of Kanghai Peak, Yi Hao. Uncle Yi, Yelingxian said with a smile, her voice was clear and pleasant. Yi Hao nodded slightly, looked at Yelingxian's eyes full of emotion and appreciation, and said with a smile, "I have grown to this point without knowing it." The last time Yelingxian came to Lianji sect, he still remembered that the other party was just a little girl, but now, she has become a tall and graceful girl. With such beauty, in 2 years' time, I'm afraid she will be able to compete with Lan Mulian's beauty. Uncle Yi taught me well, Yelingxian said with a smile. Yi Hao was obviously very impressed, but he said with a straight face, "You can say some nice things." Then, a smile couldn't help but appear on his face, and he continued, "This time the 9 peaks are selecting inner disciples, you may consider Kanghai Peak. The resources and strength of the 9 peaks are the same. Uncle Yi dare not say anything else, but as long as you are at Kanghai Peak, if you need any elixirs or medicinal materials, I can get them for you." Yelingxian glanced at Musian subconsciously, and when he saw that he didn't speak, he replied reservedly, "Thank you, Uncle Yi, I want to think about it seriously." Yi Hao raised his eyebrows slightly and glanced at Musian without any trace. A veteran like Yi Hao could naturally tell that Ye Lingxian seemed to be extremely dependent on Musian. This was somewhat rare. He could naturally tell that Ye Lingxian was actually an extremely proud girl. Girls like this should be looked down upon most by dandy disciples. Although Musian is not considered a dandy disciple now, Ye Lingxian and Musian both grew up in Tianqian City in the past. About Musian she should have heard a lot of rumors. It seems that, if nothing else, this little friend Mu has a good rapport with women. When a certain inner disciple is selected for the first of the 9 main peaks, that inner disciple actually has the right to refuse. However, under normal circumstances no disciple would do this. After all, it would offend people too much. The second of the 9 main peaks in the last sect competition has the right to take the lead in selecting inner sect disciples. It is impossible for someone as fragrant as Ye Lingxian to leave it to Kang Haifeng to choose at the end. The only way is for Ye Lingxian to choose Kang Hai Peak. Yi Hao's eyes flashed slightly, he nodded with a smile, and took the initiative to extend an olive branch, saying, "Then think about it carefully, the door of Kang Hai Peak will always be open to you." Just as he said this, Ye Yu's respectful voice suddenly came from the side, "First seat." Yi Hao turned his head slightly and saw the young cultivator who had just refined the 5th grade elixir, Ye Yu. He glanced at the elixir in Ye Yu's hand and said with some appreciation, "Not bad, you can refine the 5th grade elixir at such a young age. If you work hard in the future, you may have a place in the alchemy pavilion in the future." Ye Yu immediately clasped his fists and said, "Thank you for the praise, Master. I will do my best to win glory for Kang Hai Peak." When he said this, he glanced at Ye Lingxian inadvertently, but found that the girl had no expression change from beginning to end, and seemed to not care about the 5th grade elixir. Her eyes were always fixed on Musian, as if she was a little absent-minded. This scene also made Ye Yu's smug smile on his face slightly stiff, and the Yurong pill in his hand was almost crushed uncontrollably. "This is a 5th grade elixir. You know, there are only elixirs from the 1st grade to the 9th grade. Above that, there are heavenly elixirs, which are no longer within the scope of what cultivators can refine. Every time a heavenly elixir is refined, it will alarm the heavens and trigger a vast thunder tribulation. Generally speaking, a 5th grade elixir can only be refined if one has practiced Qi at least at the 7th grade, but he was able to refine it with the level of practicing Qi at the 3rd grade. Recalling the glimmer in the eyes of those female cultivators looking at him just now, and Ye Lingxuan's expressionless and indifferent look at this moment, the contrast between the two made Ye Yu feel a huge gap in his heart, and he was worried about gains and losses. At this time, Yi Hao had come to the front of a group of disciples, and talked to them about the bright future of the path of cultivation. After encouraging them, he left the peak of Kang Hai Peak. Ye Lingxian, Bai Ruoxi and Wei Mengru, these 3 people, must strive for at least one of them this time, which is also to prepare for the next sect competition. What he needs to do now is to offer conditions that will make these 3 people excited, for example, precious elixirs or exercises. Time is running out, he must discuss with his junior brother as soon as possible and make a decision as soon as possible. As Yi Hao left, the eyes of these sect disciples also fell on Ye Lingxian, who was not far away. Occasionally, a strong wind blew over the peak, causing the light purple dress of this graceful girl to flutter backwards. Her collar was close to her chest, and the thin collar showed off her already large figure. Sister Lingxuan's chest should be 1/3 of Ruoxi's. Musian looked at it for a few times and thought to himself, "Well, but big has its advantages, small has its advantages, and this girl is still in the development stage, so her future size is limitless. Besides, he could provide some small help later. I dare not say it will be bigger than Ruoxi, but at least it can be a little bigger." Seemingly aware of where Musian's eyes were staring, Ye Lingxian could not help but roll her eyes at Musian and whispered, "What are you looking at?" There seemed to be a little more coquettish meaning in that voice of a little girl who was in love. This roll of eyes looked quite cute and playful, and also made many people's eyes fall on Ye Lingxian. After rolling her eyes, Ye Lingxian stared at Muzian's face for a long time. These few days, she was in retreat in Linglong's cave mansion. She calmed down for a long time alone and realized her feelings. In the past, because of her sister Yechian, she would always subconsciously avoid this feeling. But since she was in retreat alone, every time she closed her eyes in her spare time, she thought of the teasing words of this big boy who seemed like a neighbor's brother, as well as his handsome face and kind smile. Even the fact that he was able to obtain the inheritance in the spirit dragon cave heaven and activate the ability of the dragon's whiskers was also because of him. When thinking of this, Ye Lingxian stared at Muzian with a hint of infatuation and tenderness in her light purple eyes. "What's wrong, Lingxian?" Muzian asked doubtfully, thinking that my face is handsome, but it shouldn't be so fascinating to this girl who can be calm no matter what happens. Ye Lingxian shook her head gently and smiled, "It's okay." After that, she retracted her gaze, nodded politely to Yeyu, and said, "Let's go back first, brother Yeyu." After that, she took Muzian's wrist and left the peak together. "You should be tired after being in seclusion for so long." Muzian took up his courage, took Ye Lingxian's hand, turned his head and smiled at her. The touch of the warm palm made Ye Lingxian's face turn lightly red, but due to the girl's reserve, she still tried to maintain her elegant image, looking forward with a calm expression. "Well, I'm not very tired, but there are so many people watching, can you let go of my hand?" She looked a little dissatisfied. "Does it mean that you can't let go when there is no one?" Muzian looked at her sideways and asked softly. Ye Lingxian suddenly fell silent, but did not speak for a long time. The two held hands and walked all the way back to the glazed palace. At the same time, Yeyu was still standing on the top of Kanghai Peak, looking at the two people leaving. He could only feel the cold wind drilling into his skin, bringing a biting chill, but it was still difficult to extinguish the jealousy in his heart. During this period, Yeyu, with his identity as an alchemist and his own talent, can be said to have been favored and flattered by many people, including one or two female cultivators with good looks. However, when Ye Lingxian came out of seclusion, the brilliance she displayed made the surrounding female cultivators all dim. Recalling the scene in the past when Ye Lingxian had affectionately called him brother Yeyu, and seeing the scene just now when he treated him like a stranger, Yeyu's anger towards Muzian had reached an uncontrollable point. Yeyu did not seem to have thought that in the past, he had many opportunities to pursue Ye Lingxian in the Ye family, but at that time he was waiting for others to take the initiative. Now that Ye Lingxian was taken initiative by others, whose fault was it? "Master Ye, it seems that you are not in a good mood." At this time, a gloomy voice suddenly came from behind. Yeyu turned his head and saw the third prince wearing a four-clawed python robe and a jade-like face. "Third prince." Yeyu frowned slightly, "What's the matter with you?" He hated Muzian, but he also had no good feelings for the third prince. Because in essence, the third prince and Muzian are the same kind of people, they are both the kind of dandy disciples who never work hard and only know how to be clever. "It seems that you hate Muzian to the core, right?" the third prince said in a voice transmission, holding a folding fan in his hand and smiling. Yeyu frowned slightly, and seeing that he was keeping it a secret, he didn't want to pay any attention to it at all, and turned to leave. At this time, the third prince sent a voice transmission again, "Is there really a demon in Bairuoxi's body?" Yeyu's footsteps paused, and he subconsciously turned his head to look at the third prince. "Where did you find out?" Yeyu sent a voice transmission. The third prince narrowed his eyes slightly. "It seems that what Manting said is true. As someone who grew up in the royal family in the past, he still has the brains to ask Huang Manting and then find other people to verify it. It seems that there is indeed a demon in the body of Miss Bairuoxi, but when he was in Tianqian City, you couldn't defeat the Mu family. But this is Lianji sect." You looked at the thoughtful look of the third prince, and a name emerged in his mind, Huang Manting. Recently, the third prince seems to be very close to the eldest lady of Chinexai Chamber of Commerce. Although you never knew what the third prince was thinking, why he would pursue a demon girl like Huang Manting. You obviously didn't know that some people like to be dogs under Huang Manting's feet, not because they have no money or need her, but purely because of like the feeling of being stepped on. In the final analysis, let alone in the mortal world, even in the world of immortal cultivation, there are many people who pay others to be their masters. There are all kinds of weird people in this world, and there are many of them. Just like Musian is still fantasizing about the future when he captures Wei Mengru, he will let Mengru lift her skirt as if she were looking at a bug, and step on him with her left leg in white silk stockings and her right leg in black silk stockings. Of course, this is just some sentimentality, and it does not mean that Musian likes to be treated like that all the time. What do you want to do? You said in a voice transmission. The third prince sneered, I will do what others dare not do. Musian secretly harbored a demon cultivator, this crime, it is not too much to die 100 times. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 122. Demon cultivators, in the general environment of this fairy world, at least in Dongzhou, a place full of human cultivators, hiding demon cultivators secretly is definitely a serious crime of collaborating with the enemy. If there is really evil spirit in Bairuoxi's cauldron, it means that the family behind her is not clean. And Musian, who also had an affair with her, was naturally unclean. After all, the relationship between the two is so close. If it is finally found out that Bairuoxi is a demon cultivator, Musian will not be able to get rid of the relationship no matter what. The third prince sighed with regret as he walked on the road to Huabao Peak. Although it was a pity that a beautiful woman like Bairuoxi was ruined like this, but, she wasn't his woman anyway, so there was no need to care about her. Although Bairuoxi is good, she is the type who is so cold that people get close to her. But what he likes is a tall and sexy beauty like Huang Manting. What's more, without Musian, his future life in the sect will be smooth. The third prince has been observing Musian since he entered the sect, and later obtained information about Musian. He is almost convinced that Musian's behavior is exactly the same as that of the current prince, his own emperor. Brother is very similar. If we say the only difference, it's probably that the current prince doesn't know how to govern the government at all. If the father abdicates the throne in the future, the emperor's brother may not be able to secure his position as emperor after he succeeds. At that time, maybe it will be your chance. Of course, there is no point in thinking about this now, because what we have to do now is to get rid of the current enemy first. If you can't even deal with the dandy disciple of a family, how can you talk about dealing with the emperor's brother when he returns to the government and the public in the future? The third prince came to Huabao Peak and spoke to the disciple standing outside in front of the palace gate, I'm looking for the deputy chief. The disciple looked at the third prince, and obviously knew that the third prince had a close relationship with the deputy chief of Huabao Peak, so he smiled and nodded and said, wait a moment, I will go in and report to the deputy chief. In less than a cup of tea, the disciple came back to the main hall and led the third prince into the main hall. The Tao cultivated by the 9 main peaks of Lianji sect are all completely different. For example, the Tao cultivated by Huabao Peak is the technique of initiation. Initiating weapons, elixirs, and various props is Huabao Feng's main practice. Artifacts have spiritual powers, but most weapons are just ordinary weapons before they are enlightened. Even if they use the best materials, they are still just ordinary weapons. But after enlightenment, whether it is a weapon, elixir, or prop, there may be a weapon spirit that will accompany you throughout your life in the future. Therefore, as long as the disciples from Huabao Peak can practice well, their popularity will definitely be no less than that of alchemists. At this time, in front of the main hall, Ning Shuwen, the deputy leader of Huabao Peak, was leaning on the throne. After raising his hand to screen away the disciples around him, his eyes fell directly on the young man who walked into the main hall. In 2 days there will be the selection ceremony for the inner disciples. If you don't concentrate on your cultivation, why would you come to Huabao Peak? Ning Shuwen is the uncle of the current emperor of the Daqian dynasty, so he will naturally take some care of the nephew of the royal family. Uncle Emperor, I investigated Musian's affairs not long ago and found out something, so I came here to report to Uncle Emperor, the third prince said with his fists clasped. Musian. There was a bit of confusion in Ning Shuwen's eyes. Who is Musian? In this Kanghai Peak assessment, it is suspected that the despicable villain used the formation to pass the assessment. When the third prince said this, he raised his head and stared at Ning Shuwen, saying, the emperor may not know Musian, but Musian Jian's Taoist companion is the first genius to become a disciple this time, by Ruoxi. By Ruoxi. Ning Shuwen became a little more interested and said, what you want to say is related to her. This time, the leader specially ordered his subordinates that during the inner disciple selection 2 days later, if Bai Ruoxi agrees to become an inner disciple of Huabao Peak, he will be given a weapon that can activate the weapon spirit. The type of weapon is up to her to choose. With Bai Ruoxi's qualifications, she is worthy of such a weapon. After all, that woman is not only the best among geniuses, but also has a beautiful appearance that stands out from other women. Bai Ruoxi entering Huabao Peak will also attract many disciples to choose Huabao Peak. But she didn't expect that she already had a Taoist companion, and a disciple she had never heard of before. The third prince clasped his fists and said, according to the investigation, that Bai Ruoxi is probably a demon cultivator. Ning Shuwen narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the third highness with a bit of surprise in his eyes. What are you going to do? Ning Shuwen asked. Destroying demons and protecting the Tao is the lifelong pursuit of monks like us. Now that we have discovered it, we must naturally expose it, the third prince said with a righteous air. Ning Shuwen nodded slightly, you make the decision on this matter yourself, but remember, don't make too much noise. Lianji sect is not a court, so don't take action directly within the section. If Bai Ruoxi is a demon cultivator, she will be exposed even if she enters Huabao Peak in the future, which will waste an inner disciple's quota. If the third prince slandered her, then the leader of Huabao Peak would come forward to help her. Once this favor is given, wouldn't it be obvious to the inner disciples which main peak she would choose in 2 days? As for giving the demon measuring ruler to the third prince and causing trouble to Bai Ruoxi, it would be okay for him to be the bad guy for the time being, and then let the leader play the role of the good guy. It is enough as long as the result is good. Ning Shuwen raised his hand and threw out a ruler that looked about the size of a finger. This is a demon measuring ruler. If there is a demon cultivator in Liulai Palace, it will point out the demon cultivator's location for you. If it does not point out the demon cultivator's location, it means that your information is wrong. At that time, restrain these thoughts of revenge and concentrate on practice, Ning Shuwen said. The third prince's eyes were filled with joy. He took the demon ruler, cupped his fists and said, I will follow your uncle's teachings. When he looked up at the uncle, the third prince's eyes were full of expectation. There is no way to catch Musian, but what about the people around him? Liulai Palace. In a carefully cultivated villa, Muji Anzhen and Ye Lingxian strolled in front of the garden, listening to the girls' insights while receiving inheritance in seclusion. Sister Lingxian, the leader just said that you are a natural spirit, right? Musian held Ye Lingxuan's little hand and looked sideways at this slender little beauty. He paused for a moment on her snow-white side face and continued to smile. Is it the physique that awakened in Dongtian Mansion? Ye Lingxian nodded slightly and said in a clear and pleasant voice, I don't know where Senior Linglong found that pool. When he got close to it, the dragon's soaring beard seemed to come to life. After that, I vaguely felt that I had a breakthrough, so I meditated nearby. When Ye Lingxian said this, he hesitated for a moment, stopped slowly, looked up at Musian, and said softly, "I'm sorry, originally, Brother Mew only temporarily handed over the dragon whisker to me for safekeeping, but it turned out that it was in my care when I meditate, it becomes integrated into my body." Muzian's eyes moved slightly and said, "So, Saring Dragon Beard has been completely swallowed by you now?" Yelingxian nodded slightly, full of apology, and said, "I'm sorry, I will definitely make it up to Brother Mew in the future. This time, no matter what you say, you must give compensation of the same value as Long Tanksu." While Yelingxian was thinking about such things, Muzian lowered his head and looked at the beautiful woman in front of him. At this time, Yelingxian was standing by the pool in the sun, with a waist as thin as a bunch, a beautiful snow-white neck showing fair skin, and a graceful and elegant figure. What kind of compensation is needed for this? Muzian couldn't help but reveal a knowing smile. Seeing that Muzian didn't speak for a long time, Yelingxian raised his head slightly, stared at him with bright and hopeful eyes, and asked doubtfully, "Brother Mew?" Muzian looked at the beautiful girl in front of him, slightly smelled the fragrance of orchids on her body, and said with a smile, "There's no need to compensate. I never planned to get Long Tangsu back from the beginning. Since I can be completely absorbed by you for my own use, that's the best thing." Yelingxian was obviously not happy and said softly, "No, I must compensate Brother Mew. Without compensation, wouldn't it be as if she deliberately got close to Muzian because of Long Tanksu and wanted to take advantage of him? If you have to say compensation, haven't you already given it to me a long time ago?" Muzian stared at Yelingxian's delicate profile and said suddenly. Yelingxian frowned slightly, seemingly unable to understand what Muzian meant, and raised her head to speak. At this time, she suddenly felt that Muzian's other hand was being clenched tightly by Muzian, and his two small hands were completely in his hands. Yelingxian's face could not help but be stained with a faint blush, and she said softly, "What are you doing suddenly?" When she said this, her eyes darted everywhere, as if she was too embarrassed to look at Muzian due to inner shame. Muzian held Yelingxian's delicate hand tightly and said softly, "Isn't this the best compensation?" Yelingxian was stunned, and it was not until a long time later that she seemed to understand the meaning of what Muzian said. She glanced at him faintly, feeling extremely complicated in her heart, and said softly, "What about Jian'er? She is the sister that Jian'er has always respected since childhood. If she knew that her sister was actually intimate with the man she liked." At this time, Muzian raised his hand and gently touched Yelingxian's head, and said with a smile, "Jian'er is a very kind girl, and I am not willing to hurt her. Leave her side to me." Seeing the reassuring smile on Muzian's face, Yelingxian stared at his gentle smile, and after a long time, she softly said The two strolled in the garden for a while. Muzian suddenly remembered something and asked, "By the way, what state are you in now?" "In my impression, Yelingxian seems to be 16 years old. Logically speaking, at this age, a second level or third level Qilian will already be a monster. However, after all, Yelingxian has just integrated the ability of Long Tanksu not long ago, so she should be stronger than it was much stronger before." Yelingxian did not speak, but smiled slightly, making the girl more gentle and demure. "Brother Mew will know when the inner disciples are selected later. Do you still want to show off?" Muzian sighed helplessly, "Maybe in a few months, your brother Mew won't be able to beat you." "Isn't that just right?" Yelingxian raised her slender fingers lightly, tucked a strand of hair behind her ears, looked sideways, and gave Muzian a soft and gentle smile. "If he really becomes stronger in the future, he can just help Brother Mew." Of course, Yelingxian would not say this directly, she would just stare into his eyes. Feeling a hint of tenderness in the girl's eyes that he had never seen before, Muzian smiled and said, "Jian'er has been missing you these days, you can go and chat with her first. I'll stew the 8 treasure crane later and let you taste it." 8 treasure crane, Yelingxian's eyes were filled with a hint of surprise. If I remember correctly, only the head of Kanghai Peak should have so many 8 treasure cranes. How could Brother Mu have 8 treasure cranes? Although a little confused, Yelingxian still smiled and nodded, stepped on short boots, and walked into the house with her snow-white calves vaguely revealed as her skirt swayed. This girl and I are destined to be together. Musian stared at Yelingxian's graceful figure disappearing from his sight, and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. From the current performance, if the previous guess is correct, Bai Ruoxi is the first chosen girl, then Yelingxian is obviously the second. Fortunately, this 8 treasure crane is big enough for several people to share. Musian turned and left the garden, and came to Tianhe Garden. However, to his surprise, at this time, in front of the gate of Tianhe Garden, there were nearly 100 cultivators. Why are there so many people gathered in front of Ruoxi's villa? Musian narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the crowded crowd. The third prince said that there is a demon cultivator hidden in your villa, so it attracted so many disciples of the sect to watch. At this time, a light and cold voice suddenly came to his ears. Musian turned his head slightly. It was Wei Mengru, a maid wearing a yellow skirt and a light and soft figure. The third prince really came. Musian was a little surprised. He just dug a pit a little bit, thinking that the deputy chief behind the third prince should let the other party act carefully. Unexpectedly, he came to question so openly. It seemed that someone sent a message to the third prince, and the crowd slightly retreated to a path, and standing in the crowd, with a handsome face and 2 dark circles under his eyes, marked his identity as a master of time management. Master Mu, you are finally back. Were you dating Sister Lingxian just now? The third prince smiled gently and looked at Musian and said, Master Mu is so indecisive even though he already has such a beautiful Taoist partner. Musian said calmly, Master Mu, what's the matter with you bringing such a large group of people to my Tianhe garden? Master Mu is really an anxious person. When the third prince said this, he bowed to everyone and said, not long ago, I accidentally learned that there are still demon cultivators in our section. As disciples of the Lianji sect, we are in accordance with the law of nature to eliminate demons. The third prince changed his tone and continued, of course, I don't want to slander any good person, so I went to Huabao Peak and borrowed a demon ruler there. When he said this, he took out a ruler the size of a finger from his sleeve and said, this demon ruler will indicate the specific direction and location of the demon cultivator. Demon ruler. Many people stared at the ruler in the third prince's hand and recognized its identity. This is the demon measuring ruler of Huabao Peak. Although it has no spirit, it is enough to detect whether there are demon cultivators. It should be said that he is worthy of being the third prince of the Dogon dynasty. Even in the Lianji sect, he still has some power behind him. Under the eyes of everyone, the third prince gently threw up the demon measuring ruler. After the ruler rotated in the air, it slowly stopped. Then, the arrow of the ruler locked the direction of Tianhe Garden. At the same time, a faint pink light emanated from the surface of the ruler. Demonic aura. Everyone was in an uproar. Even though they had heard the third prince say that there were demon cultivators in Tianhe Garden before, they still remained skeptical. But this demon measuring ruler will not lie. This means that there are really demon cultivators in this villa. Under the surprised gazes of the crowd, the third prince looked at Musian, who had an expressionless face, and said, Master Mu, I want to ask you, there are demon cultivators in Tianhe Garden, do you know about this? Musian did not speak, but just lowered his eyes slightly. Finally took the bait. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 123. As the third prince opened his mouth to question, many people's eyes fell on Musian. What he just said was actually a trap in itself. Ask Muzian if he knows that there are demon cultivators in Tianhe Garden. If Muzian denies it because he is panicked, it will be easier to handle later. As long as the third prince uses the demon measuring ruler to prove that Bairuoxi is a demon cultivator, Muzian's lie will be self-defeating. But if the other party nods and admits it at this time, then the matter of covering the demon cultivator will be completely eliminated. In other words, no matter what Muzian does, this is a dead end. Just as the third prince expected, when the sonorous and powerful questioning voice fell, Muzian's expression also changed, and he subconsciously staggered back half a step, his body trembling slightly. In the crowd, Yayu stared at Muzian's ashen face and couldn't help but feel a little gloating. In Tianqian City, your Mu family covers the sky with one hand and colludes with the major families in Tianqian City to deceive the superiors and deceive the subordinates. But what about in Aisha? The person he was facing was the third prince, who was supported by a giant behind him. Can you continue to misrepresent yourself as you did in Tianqian City, tell lies with your eyes wide open, and insist that Bairuoxi is not a demon cultivator? In the crowd, Huang Manting's eyes also flickered slightly, staring closely at Muzian's fearful look. What does this young Master Mu want to do? Let himself leak all the information about Bairuoxi and him to the third prince, and take the initiative to hand the knife to the third prince. No matter how you think about it, it is not something Muzian would do. But he actually did it. If you don't know the details, you might think that Muzian has been killed in this situation, but Huang Manting is part of Muzian's plan, so she naturally knows that the other party should still have some backup plans. But once it is proven that Bairuoxi is a demon cultivator, any backup plan will be useless, right? At this time, Muzian took a deep breath, exhaled it slowly, raised his head and stared at the third prince, and said in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, third prince, although there is some connection between you and me, it is not a matter of throwing dirty water for no reason. Things that sect disciples should do." Throwing dirty water, the third prince laughed and said, "Young Master Mu, you mean that you don't know that there are demon cultivators hidden in Tianhe Garden?" Muzian stared at the third prince closely and said, "I have lived in Tianhe Garden for so many days, and I have never heard of any demon cultivators in this garden. After all, this is the Lianji sect, how can there be any demons here? Dare Xiu come to Lianji sect openly?" The third prince smiled lightly and said, "In the past, I couldn't believe that this was true, but dash." He raised his finger slightly and pointed at the demon measuring ruler that was slowly rotating in mid-air and pointed at Tianhe Garden. There has never been any misjudgment in the demon measuring ruler. Could it be that Master Mu is questioning the owner who refined this demon measuring ruler? The demon measuring ruler is the first weapon made by the leader of Huabao Peak himself. As soon as the demon measuring ruler comes out, the demon cultivator has nowhere to hide. Not only that, its own destructive power is also extremely strong. It is said that the demon measuring ruler in the first hand of Huabao Peak has cultivated a weapon spirit after being enlightened. What the third prince just said was directly referring to the first seat, indirectly accusing Muzian of challenging the authority of the first seat. After all, he is a member of the royal family, so he is very professional. Muzian looked expressionless and said calmly, "Of course I believe in the demon measuring ruler, but I really don't know if there are any demon cultivators in Tianhe Garden. Exist. Even now, I'm still thinking about getting rid of the relationship." "It's too late," the third prince sneered secretly and said loudly, "Of course I don't want to wrong any good person, and I also think that Master Mu probably doesn't know about the demon cultivator hiding in Tianhe Garden." He paused and continued, "Master Mu, do you dare to let us enter Tianhe Garden to find out what's going on? If the demon cultivator is not found, then I have wrongly blamed you. I would like to apologize for the trouble this time has caused to Master Mu. But if the demon cultivator is really found, especially if the demon cultivator has a close relationship with Master Mu." The third prince smiled and said, "Then Master Mu will probably have to accept the investigation of the Lianji section." I was wrongly blamed. Is it enough to just apologize? Musian asked suddenly. The third prince raised his eyebrows slightly and said, then what do you want? I want to make a bet with the third prince. Musian raised his head and stared at the third prince. If there is a demon cultivator in Tianhe Garden who has something to do with me, I will let the sect fall into disgrace and send 500,000 spiritual stones to the third prince. If the third highness's attack today is to slander a good person, I don't want to embarrass the third highness. I only ask the third highness to give you 1,000,000 spiritual stones in the next 3 days, of which 500,000 will be for mental losses. Millions of spirit stones. Such a quantity made all the monks present slightly moved. Under normal circumstances, an ordinary monk would be quite wealthy if he could have 20,000 to 30,000 spirit stones a year, but the bet between these two people directly raised the number of spirit stones to 1,000,000. If you can really get these 1,000,000 spirit stones, you may not have to worry about money for a long time in the future. The third prince narrowed his eyes slightly and stared at Musian in surprise. He was not an idiot. At this moment, he was beginning to feel that something was not right. Is Musian giving up on himself, or is he trying to persuade him to quit in this way? 1,000,000 spiritual stones, even if he was the third prince of the Dacian dynasty, he would not be able to come up with so many in one go. But if he retreats like this today, wouldn't he become a big joke? Now there are so many cultivators watching nearby. If they retreat because of Musian's threat, how can they gain a foothold in Lianji sect in the future? The gamble proposed by Master Mu is really surprising, but do you have 500,000 spirit stones on you now? At this time, a young man in the crowd suddenly asked. Musian turned his head and saw Yayu in a black robe. I don't have 500,000 spirit stones on me, but if the third prince confirms the existence of demon cultivators in Tianhe Garden, I will exchange the natural treasures in the ring for spirit stones, Musian said lightly. When he came to Lianji sect, he brought about 100,000 spirit stones. It's not that the Mu family lacks these spirit stones, but like some new students in modern times, Musian doesn't like to take spirit stones from his family. So, Master Mu doesn't have 500,000 spirit stones on him. The third prince immediately found a point to attack, and said with a smile, since there are not so many spirit stones, what is the point of Master Mu's bet? How about this, if I slandered Master Mu today, I will apologize to you in front of everyone and give you another 50,000 spirit stones. What do you think? He believed in the judgment of the demon ruler, but at the same time, he didn't want to bet so much. 1,000,000 spirit stones, if he really lost the bet, he might have to send someone back to the Dogon dynasty. If that happens, he will become a laughing stock of the royal family in the future. Let's follow the bet just now. At this time, not far behind the crowd, a clear and pleasant voice suddenly came. Everyone looked over, and at the end of the crowd, a girl in a light purple dress was walking towards here. Yayu's eyes fixed. It was Ya Lingxian. Under the gaze of the crowd, Ya Lingxian walked to Musian and said with a smile, Brother Mu doesn't have that many spirit stones on him, but with the power of the Mu family, it is not difficult to take out 500,000 spirit stones. However, since the third prince doesn't believe him, I will pay for the 500,000 spirit stones first. Is that okay? When Ya Lingxian finished speaking, she handed the ring in her hand to Musian. If there are really demon cultivators in Tianhe Garden, all the spirit stones in this ring will be given to the third prince. Ya Lingxian turned her head to look at the third prince, and suddenly changed her tone and said lightly, but if the third prince is just making things difficult for Brother Mu for personal revenge, then please give the third prince 1,000,000 spirit stones, slap yourself 10 times, and admit your mistakes. How about it? The third prince's face changed slightly. Obviously he didn't expect that the girl who suddenly broke in would change the situation in an instant. Sister Lingxian, aren't you afraid of wasting 500,000 spirit stones? Musian looked at the girl beside him helplessly and sighed softly. Ya Lingxian smiled and said softly, I believe Brother Mu is innocent." When she said this, she looked up at the third prince and said with a smile, "Since the third prince is so sure that there are demon cultivators in Tianhe Garden, he should not be afraid, right?" The third prince's face froze slightly. The other party's so sure look actually made him lose some confidence. But he looked up at the demon ruler pointing directly at Tianhe Garden in the air, gritted his teeth, and said, "Okay. If I wronged Master Mu today, I will slap myself 10 times and pay 1,000,000 spirit stones within 3 days. Words are not enough, it's better to make an oath." Ya Lingxian stared at the third prince expressionlessly. Although she looks like a sweet and pure beautiful girl on weekdays, the aura she exudes at this time is more like that of a queen, aggressive and irresistible. "Why does it feel like Sister Lingxian is also black when cut open?" Muzian looked at the girl's delicate and flawless profile and couldn't help but complain in his heart. The third prince took a deep breath and said, "If I don't find the demon cultivator in Tianhe Garden today, I will slap myself 10 times and offer 1,000,000 spirit stones within 3 days. If I violate it, I will be struck by lightning." Muzian then said, "If the third prince's words are confirmed, I am willing to offer 500,000 spirit stones and let the sect decide." Boom! A thunderclap resounded in the sky, as if witnessing the oath made by the two. In the world of immortal cultivation, if the oath made by the cultivator is not fulfilled in the future, he will be punished by heaven. Even if he survives the punishment of heaven, every thunder tribulation in the future will be several times more difficult than that of ordinary people. Once the oath is made, it can no longer be changed. Yu stared at Ya Lingxian, who was very close to Muzian, and her focused eyes when she looked at Muzian, and his heart couldn't help but twist. Regardless of whether Muzian has any problems in the end, the third prince and Muzian, whoever dies is fine. Of course, it would be best if Muzian died. This time, it is enough for him to be a spectator. "Master, do you think Biruoxi is really a demon cultivator?" In the sky far away, a young man in a white robe put his hands behind his back and looked sideways at the deputy chief of Huabao Peak and asked. Ning Shuwen shook his head slowly and smiled, "If it is a demon cultivator, then it is. If not, we will go down and prove it for her later. As for now, let the third prince make a fuss by himself. Of course, if you want to win him over later, you have to do it as soon as possible," Ning Shuwen added. The third prince made such a big fuss, and the cultivators in the sect who were not in seclusion naturally noticed it. Now it is not only the cultivators of Huabao Peak, I am afraid that there are already many high-level members of the sect secretly observing the scene under the sky. If it is really a demon cultivator, suppress it. If it weren't for the demon cultivator, this matter would have been a petty quarrel among the sect disciples themselves, and there would be no need for them, the elders, to end up in trouble. The third prince raised his head, stared at Muzian, and said in a deep voice, "Master Mu, can we now enter Tianhe Garden to investigate? If that demon cultivator notices what's going on here and runs away, neither you nor I can bear the responsibility." Muzian raised his head, looked at the calamity clouds that had gradually disappeared under the sky, and suddenly said, "It seems that the oath has taken effect." The third prince frowned slightly and was about to speak. At this time, Muzian nodded slightly and said, "Third prince, please excuse me." Looking at Muzian's seemingly indifferent expression, the third prince felt something was not right for some reason. But now that the arrow is on the string, it is naturally impossible to back down. What's more, the demon measuring ruler's reaction has become more and more intense since the beginning. There are definitely demon cultivators in Tianhe Garden. The third prince raised his hand and put the demon measuring ruler in his palm, turned his head and scanned the crowd, clasped his fists and said, "Please also invite everyone present to be witnesses. If there is really a demon cultivator here, we will capture it together." After that, he strode towards the direction pointed by the demon measuring ruler. Behind him, a group of monks followed the third prince one after another. High in the air, Ning Shuwen and his disciples looked at each other and followed secretly. The moment the third prince stepped into Tianhe Garden, the surface of the measuring ruler lit up with an even stronger pink light. Click. A crisp cracking sound sounded, causing the third prince's expression to change slightly. Ning Shuwen walked over at a snail's pace, glanced at the cracked demon measuring ruler in the third prince's hand, his expression changed slightly, and he said, "You all, please step aside first. This Tianhe garden not only has demon cultivators, but also demon cultivators with extremely terrifying strength, otherwise this demon ruler would not have broken into pieces." The disciples of the sect all recognized Ning Shuwen's identity, and they couldn't help but tremble in their hearts when they saw the deputy chief's face was so solemn. How terrifying are the demon cultivators in Tianhe Garden today? The third prince looked at the scene and sneered secretly in his heart. Yayu's brows frowned inadvertently. He always felt something was not right. Is Bairuoxi's strength really strong enough for the deputy chief to take him so seriously? Ning Shuwen turned to look at Musian and said seriously, "Do you know how serious a crime it is to hide a demon cultivator privately?" Musian was not humble and did not say a word. He cupped his fists and said, reporting to the leader, "This junior does not know that there are demon cultivators in Tianhe Garden." The third prince immediately got angry. Even a measuring stick cannot withstand such a huge amount of demonic energy. You who live in Tianhe Garden every day actually say that you don't know. I'm afraid you don't believe it yourself, Master Mu. It is a capital crime to shield a demon cultivator, but if you can take the initiative to hand over the demon cultivator, I can report it to the sect and give you some relief. You only need to be imprisoned in the back mountain for 100 years, Ning Shuwen said. Musian said helplessly, "But this junior really doesn't know anything about demon cultivators." He paused and looked at the demon measuring ruler pointing directly at a certain room. As if he thought of something, he suddenly said, "Speaking of which, a friend just moved into Tianhewen a few days ago, the person the demon measuring ruler pointed to, that seems to be the way she is." "But this junior thinks she is not a demon cultivator," Musian continued. "Whether or not you are a demon cultivator is decided by the leader, not you," the third prince sneered. "Senior, does this mean the same thing?" Musian raised his head to look at Ning Shuwen and asked respectfully. Ning Shuwen nodded slightly. "Since seniors have said so, then okay." Musian walked to the front of the garden, opened his mouth slightly, and pronounced a strange syllable that was completely incomprehensible, "AAA." As the sound fell, people suddenly seemed to hear a creaking sound of the door opening. The commotion in the crowd suddenly quieted down, and countless eyes were fixed on the direction of the door. From the door, a silver-haired beauty walked out. There was no makeup on her face, her long hair fell down like a waterfall, her figure was moderate, and her bright red eyes were filled with curiosity about everything in the world. They were clear, and she observed everyone present with doubts. Who is she? So beautiful. There was a commotion in the crowd. The third prince was also stunned. Then, when he saw the measuring ruler pointing directly at the silver-haired beauty, he suddenly came to his senses, turned to look at Musian, and said in a deep voice, "Master Mu, you are telling lies with your eyes open. With such a strong demonic aura, how dare you say that she is not a demon cultivator? You can still vaguely see some scales covering the neck of this silver-haired beauty. In addition, she exudes a spiritual energy that is different from that of human monks. If this is not a demon cultivator, what else can it be?" Musian did not answer, but turned to look at Ning Shuwen and clasped his fists respectfully. "Deputy Chief, actually I think there should be a distinction between demon cultivators and demon cultivators. But if you still think she is a demon cultivator, then Junior, bring her here now. First seed." The third prince was about to speak, but found Ning Shuwen staring closely at the silver-haired beauty. After a brief moment of sluggishness, his pupil suddenly shrank as if he thought of something. "Senior Spirit Dragon." In the air, the demon ruler was quietly suspended, emitting an unprecedented strong pink light, with the arrow pointing directly at Lin Ling. Finally, the demon ruler could no longer withstand such a monstrous demonic energy and completely shattered into powder. Lin Ling seemed to have not understood what happened yet. She looked around blankly, glanced at Musian in confusion, and noticed Ning Shuwen's gaze again, and tilted her head slightly. AAA. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 124. In fact, demon cultivators and demons in this world should be distinguished. To be precise, there are demons even in Dongzhou, but they are very few, pitifully few, and they do not belong to the demon world. In a sense, Linglong is also in the category of demon. Because the aura emanating from her body is also demon aura. Now everything is very clear. The demon cultivator just pointed at by the demon ruler is obviously Linglong. Just hearing an incomprehensible gentle AAA in his ear, it seems that there is infinite pressure coming, making Ning Shuwen sweat coldly on his back. The deputy head of Huabao Peak, this title can intimidate others in most places of Lianji sect. Only in front of the sect master and the senior Linglong can't do it. The third prince stared at the eyes of this silver-haired beauty. For some reason, he felt that he seemed to have seen her somewhere. He subconsciously glanced at Ning Shuwen beside him and said, "First seat." Before he finished speaking, Ning Shuwen had already made a prompt decision, raised his hands and clasped his fists, and said respectfully, "Senior Linglong, I didn't know you were staying here, please forgive me for disturbing you." The third prince's eyes were slightly sluggish, and he came back to his senses after a while, and suddenly raised his head to look at Lin Ling. Linglong. This silver-haired beauty with a demonic aura is the Linglong that existed when the Lianji sect was founded. She looks like this in human form. The sect disciple who was originally planning to watch the fun was also stunned. Originally, when the demon ruler locked onto this villa, almost everyone thought that Musian was indeed hiding a demon cultivator and was in big trouble. But now, the demon cultivator has appeared. But the identity of this demon was beyond everyone's expectations. In the crowd, Huang Manting stared at Lin Ling's slender figure in a daze, and then subconsciously looked at Musian. He knew Linglong? Yes, only in this way can it explain why Musian could tell her the correct way to inherit the luck. Think about it carefully, didn't Linglong have face-to-face contact with Musian in Dongtian Mansion before? But he never thought that Linglong would leave with him and live in this villa. Why is Linglong in this villa? Yeah, you stared at the confusion on Lin Ling's pretty face, as if she hadn't woken up yet, and couldn't help but roar in his heart. The demon ruler was obviously not pointing to Bairuoxi from the beginning, but Linglong. Because of her existence, Bairuoxi's demonic aura is nothing at all. But what can be done now? Jump out and say that Bairuoxi is the demon cultivator? In this case, who dares to jump out and ask? In the distance, three chiefs who were standing high in the sky and were planning to watch the show fell into the glazed hall at the same time, walked over quickly, clasped their fists and said, "Senior Linglong." When speaking, both the tone and the demeanor were extremely respectful, without the slightest airs of a senior. Firstly, it was because Linglong's status was equal to that of the sect master, and secondly, Linglong represented the word luck. Luck is always one of the lifelong pursuits of all cultivators. Most of them, the cultivators in the Return to Void realm, are stuck in a certain grade and have been unable to move forward for decades. However, if there is the luck blessing given by Linglong, it may not be impossible to make another breakthrough in the future. However, Linglong rarely appears, and the luck blessing has always been given only to disciples of the sect, so no chief has ever considered such a thing. After all, it is not that there were no chiefs who asked to see Linglong in the past, but they were all ignored by the other party. Seeing Linglong appear here now, it is inevitable that they are a little excited. The three chiefs, one is Yi Hao, the chief of Canghai Peak, whom Musian had met several times before, and the other two chiefs. One is a graceful and charming woman, who is the chief of Dao Peak. The other one has loose red hair, and those who don't know him may think he is a demon who ran out from somewhere. He is the chief of Chunyang Peak, Xiangyan. Lin Ling glanced at the three chiefs, and then her eyes fell on Musian, and she tilted her head slightly. Is she asking me who these people are? Musian didn't know why, but he always felt that he could understand what she meant, and said respectfully, these three seniors are the chiefs of the section. Senior Yihao has given me a lot of help before, and the 8 treasure crane that the senior ate before was also raised by him. Lin Ling's eyes fell on this middle-aged man in a white robe who looked like an immortal. She nodded slightly and said AAA to show that she understood. Then, she bent down to pick up a branch beside her and wrote 2 words on the ground. Yihao looked down and saw the words "Thank you." Yihao was delighted and clasped his fists and said, Senior, you used to fight demons and defend the way for Lianji sect, and you also suppressed thousands of demon cultivators in the war with the demon clan. It is my honor to make some contribution to you. When he said this, he glanced at Musian again, with a little more appreciation and joy in his eyes. The head of Daofeng and the head of Chunyang Peak, Xiangyan, looked at Yihao strangely with a bit of jealousy. This shameless old thief actually used a junior to attract the attention of Senior Ling Long. It was really shameless. Then, he looked at Musian inadvertently for a few more times. The reason why they knew Musian was because his Taoist partner was Bairu Oxi. But they never thought that this little cultivator would have some intersection with Ling Long at some point. I'm afraid that old Yihao had known about this for a long time, so he made friends with Musian in advance. The 2 leaders secretly rebuked Yihao's sneaking behavior in their hearts, but they were also thinking about how to deal with the relationship with Musian in the future. At this time, Lin Ling pressed her skirt with both hands and wrote on the ground with a branch again, "What are you doing here just now?" Ning Shuwen's heart was pounding, and he subconsciously glanced at Musian. If he knew that Ling Long lived in this villa, he would never stand up for the third prince even if he was beaten to death. In the final analysis, there was only a family relationship between him and the third prince. But that little bit of affection was insignificant at all. If he didn't think it was just something that could be handled at hand, he would never have taken action. As if he hadn't noticed Ning Shuwen's gaze, Musian respectfully clasped his fists towards Lin Ling and said, I just made a bet with the third prince next to me. He suspected that there were demon cultivators here. He paused and continued, the 4 masters are all righteous and upright. They are all eager to protect the sect this time. They heard that there were demon cultivators in this villa, so they rushed here in their busy schedule. After Musian finished speaking, he arched his hands towards Ning Shuen, who was still in a daze, and said respectfully, Master Ning, I think there should be some misunderstandings. But I'm still not sure, Senior Ling Long, is he considered a demon cultivator? Ning Shuen breathed a sigh of relief, and there was a little more gratitude in his eyes. He arched his hands and smiled, young friend Mu, you are joking. Senior Ling Long is the guardian beast of our section. How can you talk about a demon cultivator? From the stern question just now to the gentle smile now, it fully demonstrated what is called a light-speed change of face. Musian not only did not take the opportunity to complain, but also gave him enough face and gave him a way out. Ning Shuen naturally knew how to proceed after being in Lianji sect for so long. He bowed to Ling Long and said, Senior, this is purely a personal fight between the juniors. I thought there were really demon cultivators here, so I came to take a look. Since it is just a misunderstanding, then I will not continue to interfere in this matter. After saying that, he bowed to Ling Long and the chief seat and Musian present, turned around and left without even looking at the third prince. Musian was not surprised by Ning Shuwen's reaction. Anyone who is not a fool knows what to choose. In the end, from beginning to end, the real troublemaker was the third prince. In the future in Lianji sect, he and Ning Shuen will not have any real personal grudges. The royal family is ruthless. The deputy chief of Huabao Peak has a family relationship with the third prince, but will he really help the third prince to the end for this relationship? The answer is now obvious. Musian retracted his gaze, looked at the third prince with a terribly gloomy face, and asked, "Third prince, do you think you won this bet or I won?" The third prince looked at the demon ruler in his hand, raised his head and stared at Musian. Then, as if he remembered something important, he said angrily, "No. You are deceiving me. The real demon cultivator is naturally not Senior Linglong, it should be Bairuoxi." Yes, he was misled by Musian from the beginning. The information he got should be Bairuoxi is a demon cultivator, not there is a demon cultivator in Tianhe Garden. Linglong naturally cannot be a demon cultivator, because the demon cultivator should be Bairuoxi, the genius girl who has a close relationship with Musian. Musian said in embarrassment, "Third prince, you said that there are demon cultivators in Tianhe Garden. I didn't say anything, because I thought if there are really demon cultivators, it would be good to eliminate them for the section. Then you said you wanted to check Tianhe Garden, and I asked you to check it. Now, you insist on saying if." Realizing the existence of Ye Lingxian, Musian changed his words and said, "Now you insist on saying that Miss Bai is a demon cultivator. Isn't this a bit too bullying for an honest person? Besides, do you think that if there are demon cultivators in Tianhe Garden, Senior Linglong will not notice it?" The third prince said angrily, "Senior Linglong has such a relationship with you, even if he knows about it, what can he do?" Musian's eyes widened slightly. Third prince means that Senior Linglong is colluding with demon cultivators. The third prince can make big accusations, and Musian can do the same. After all, Musian is very good at black eating black. The third prince opened his mouth slightly and was about to speak. "Nonsense." At this time, the head of Daofeng was the first to scold. His voice was clear and pleasant. "This is Lianji sect, not Dogon dynasty. Don't make trouble again, otherwise I can only ask you to leave today." Sensing the cold gaze of the Taoist nun, the third prince opened his mouth several times, but swallowed his words abruptly, feeling bitter but unable to speak. Musian glanced at Yeyu, who was staring at this place, then swept over Huang Manting and others one by one, and then retracted his gaze. The story of the wolf coming, everyone will not believe it again after hearing it once. What's more, the demonic energy in Bairuoxi's body is hidden in the cauldron, and it will not be detected at all, unless she takes the elixir on her own initiative like that day. The demonic energy may leak out. But even so, what? If Linglong says no, will anyone say yes? No, she doesn't even need to speak. She just needs to stand here, that's enough. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 125. As the leader of Daofeng shouted in a low voice, the third prince's face stiffened for an instant. His eyes were fixed on Musian from beginning to end, with a hint of surprise and anger in his eyes. No wonder he felt that the spirit dragon looked so familiar, because he had seen the spirit dragon before when he was in Dongtian Mansion. However, he didn't know at that time that this silver-haired woman was the spirit dragon. When he came to his senses at this moment, the third prince only had endless anger in his heart. Musian had dug a hole from the beginning and was waiting for him to jump in. The eldest son of the Mu family deceived everyone, even Huang Manting was deceived by him. The information Huang Manting gave was correct. However, because of the existence of the spirit dragon, it was useless no matter how correct the information was. In this situation, it is impossible to reveal Bairuoxi's identity. If he questioned Bairuoxi as a demon cultivator now, it would mean questioning Linglong's judgment. The three leaders beside him didn't speak, so how could he ask questions? The third prince stared at Musian uncertainly, suppressing the anger in his heart. Under the gaze of all the disciples, he turned towards Linling, cupped his fists and said, "This time, the junior's information was wrong. I didn't know that Senior Linglong was hiding in Master Mu's mansion. It also caused a lot of trouble to all the seniors. Please forgive me. Although these words sounded like an apology, they were actually secretly condemning Musian for hiding the spirit dragon in Tianhe Garden but keeping silent about it, which caused such trouble today. Linling didn't pay attention, or seem to care about what happened here. On the contrary, from the very beginning, a pair of red eyes stared dimly at the Na ring on Musian's finger. In other words, it is the 8 treasure crane in his precepts. The first time she ate babao, she didn't think it was very delicious, but the second time she grilled it with shangyanfei, it tasted very good. Want to eat another one? Senior Linglong, how do you think this matter should be handled? Yi Hao asked with a somewhat tentative tone. Linling wrote on the ground, you handle it yourself. Linling is not interested in the disputes in the world. After all, Linling lives here, firstly, to divert his luck and suppress his karma, and secondly, to eat and drink. She has no interest in other things. Musian clasped his fists respectfully and said, I will handle this matter properly. I am extremely sorry for disturbing the seniors because of His Highness's affairs. Many people's eyes were intentionally or unintentionally looking at the third prince who was frozen in place. This understatement directly hit the third prince's head with the pot that the third prince had just thrown. It alarmed the resting spirit dragon, not to mention the third prince. Even the current prince would be in great trouble if he came. Although these sect disciples and even the leader did not know it, Spirit Dragon would not be angry because of such a trivial matter. In the final analysis, Linling didn't care about this matter at all. Whether he was angry or not, it was all Musian's decision from beginning to end. Yi Hao's eyes then fell on the third prince and said solemnly, on weekdays, some friction between the disciples in the sect is inevitable, but if this matter is raised to a higher level, just leave the sect next time. The words sounded as easygoing as before, but the seriousness in them made the third prince's heart sink. If he had been driven back within a few days of entering the Lianji section, he would not be able to hold his head up at all in the Dacian dynasty from now on. When members of the future royal family meet him, they may be friendly on the surface, but in private, you don't need to think about it to know what they will say. Yi Hao turned to look at the disciples again, his face softened slightly, and said, Senior Linglong is simple by nature and doesn't like busy places. After you leave, remember not to spread this matter everywhere. If this matter is leaked and disturbs Senior Linglong's cultivation, no one can bear the consequences. Seeing all the disciples nodding solemnly, Yi Hao explained a few more words before leaving the place together with the other 2 leaders. They are not worried that these disciples will leak the matter. The aura technique can see whether a person is lying. If someone leaks the matter, they can use the aura technique to find it at a glance. However, before leaving, the 3 leaders all looked at Musian intentionally or unintentionally, with a little more meaning in their eyes. After watching the 3 leaders leave, Musian looked up at the third prince who was also planning to leave, and suddenly said, By the way, Your Highness, 1 million spiritual stones, can you prepare it within these 3 days? It's not that I'm in a hurry to get it, it's just that the oath has been made. If something happens to the third prince after he fails to take out the millions of spirit stones, and the third prince is punished by heaven, I'm worried that I will have a bad conscience in the future. When Musian said this, his tone was full of concern for the third prince who was also a disciple of the sect. The third prince was about to leave when he froze in place, turned his head suddenly, and stared at Musian. After a long time, he slowly exhaled and said, I will ask someone from the Dacian dynasty to send 1 million spiritual stones. When he said this, he glanced at Linling, who was covering his mouth and yawning, and walked into the room in small steps. His eyes quickly returned to Musian and said, Master Mu, I admit defeat this time. However, you know better than me whether there are demon cultivators in Tianhe Garden. If the Third Highness still feels that there are demon cultivators here, can you please, Musian stretched out his hand and made a please gesture, signaling the third prince to enter Tianhe Garden for inspection. The third prince snorted coldly, turned around and left without looking. The other sect disciples all looked at Musian intentionally or unintentionally. Everyone's eyes were a little more burning, and many of the female disciples had undisguised admiration in their eyes. Not only does he know the spirit dragon, he has extremely rich resources, and he is good-looking and well-spoken. He is simply the perfect Taoist companion. As for the Yalingxian next to him, although this girl is beautiful, she is still a little too little after all. After several experiences in bed with girls with good figures, the attractiveness of a beautiful girl like Yalingxian who is still in the developmental stage is not that great, Master Mu should understand. As if she noticed that these female disciples were looking at her with a look that looked like a love rival, Yalingxian frowned slightly and glanced at Musian without any trace. The young man with the handsome face had a gentle curve at the corner of his mouth. He looked forward and looked very upright. He never glanced at the female disciples, fully demonstrating the self-cultivation of a dedicated person. Yalingxian's eyebrows relaxed slightly, and the corners of her mouth inadvertently outlined a slight arc. Then, he raised his head and looked at the third prince who was about to leave, and said with a smile, "Your Highness, have you forgotten something important?" Everyone who thought this was the end of the matter subconsciously looked at Yalingxian, and the third prince paused as he was about to leave. He turned around and looked over, but only saw Yalingxian's smart eyes staring at him. Although she was smiling, there was no smile in her eyes. She said calmly, "The bet I just made with your brother Mu is 1,000,000 spiritual stones and 10 slaps on my face, right?" The third prince stared closely at Yalingxian's pure and lovely face, and said in a cold voice, "Miss Ye, you and I are both disciples of the section from now on. We will never see each other again without looking up, so why are we forcing each other so hard? It would be fine if Musian made an attack, but Yalingxian is just a descendant of the Ye family in Tianxian City. If he is so aggressive, is he not afraid of the Ye family's retaliation in the future?" Yalingxian said calmly, "Is 10 slaps considered serious for slandering others?" The third prince's face was frighteningly gloomy, and he sent a message, "Miss Ye, you won't worry about revenge within the sect, but the Ye family is outside the Lianji section. You have to think carefully." "Threaten?" Yalingxian pursed her lips, looked at him coldly as if looking at an insect, and said something through the sound transmission. The third prince's face was obviously stagnant, and he stared at Yalingxian's indifferent pretty face. After a long time, he gritted his teeth, raised his hand and slapped himself in the face. Then, crisp applause sounded one after another in this huge villa, but it also made the third prince stare at Musian with more hatred in his eyes. This time, he was completely defeated. But it also made the third prince feel dissatisfied. After all, he was 99% sure about this attack before he brought people to question Musian in such a big way. After all, when they arrived at Tianhe Garden, the demon measuring ruler had already shown that there were demon cultivators in Tianhe Garden. But who would have thought that it was a spiritual dragon living inside? If the spirit dragon does not live in Tianhe Garden, the most likely outcome is that the demon measuring ruler will not respond to Bairuoxi. At this time, he could just leave and find another way. But the spirit dragon is here, and the demon measuring ruler reacts to the spirit dragon. It can be said that from beginning to end, the third prince's too much trust in the demon measuring ruler led to the current result. Snap! As the last slap fell, the third prince didn't even look at Yalingxian. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled it. The handsome face covered with slap marks was actually squeezed out with great effort. A gentle smile to show your magnanimity. "Master Mu, you win this time, and I admit defeat." The third prince paused and continued to smile, "However, I know everything about you." The threat in these words was already very obvious. In the past, during the Dacian dynasty, most people would give in whenever they heard such a threat. Even some married women succumbed to the power of the third prince. but for Musian, such a threat is obviously of little use. He just smiled and nodded, remember to send the millions of spiritual stones as soon as possible. A simple sentence, but it was a heart-wrenching sentence in the true sense of the word. It also made the third prince's steps sway. He took a deep look at Musian, snorted coldly, turned around and left under the gaze of everyone. Yayu stood in the crowd, looking at the back of the third prince as he left, and then glanced at Musian and Ye Lingxian, who was looking at him from time to time. He only felt a pent-up anger in his heart that had nowhere to release. Last time Musian was in Tianqian City, the Mu family's power dominated the sky. Now that the Lianji sect has come, he meets the spirit dragon again. Why? He is obviously a man of great luck, but why were all his opportunities taken away by Musian? Is it possible that because both Bai Ruoxi and Ye Lingxian are lucky people, they can also affect Musian's luck? Yayu stared at Musian closely and clenched his fists. After a long time, he slowly loosened his clenched fists. Although the inner sect disciple selection in 2 days will be the first selection of each major, before that, there will also be a competition among the disciples who will join the section. If Musian wants to become an inner sect disciple, he must also show his performance. It takes a while. And when that time comes, the person I am today is already different from what I used to be. A monk with a 5th level of Qi training is nothing to mention. Yayu sneered secretly, turned around and left quietly from the crowd. On the other side, Musian talked with the sect disciples present for a while, and then sent them away from Tianhe Garden. The people present were all smart people, and the purpose of fawning over Musian directly now was a bit too obvious. Anyway, we are all disciples of the sect, so there will be many opportunities to make friends in the future. Huang Manting looked at Musian meaningfully in the crowd and said through a message, Mr. Mu, it's so hard for you to hide this from others. It turns out that you have known Senior Linglong for a long time. If you are free these 2 days, you might as well come and sit at my place. After saying that, he twisted his waist and left. The busy Biwen garden suddenly became deserted. Musian turned to look at Ye Lingxian and said softly, I'm sorry, I asked you to come and support me just now. Ye Lingxian smiled lightly and said in a sweet voice, it's nothing, it's just that I can't stand the third prince bullying others with his power. Is there no other reason? Musian stared at her. Being looked at by the young man so tenderly, Ye Lingxian's eyes flickered slightly, she inadvertently turned her face away, and whispered, there are other reasons too. The elegance and distance shown in front of Musian like a proud little swan in the past have completely disappeared. This is really a little rich woman who can carry 500,000 spirit stones with her. Musian couldn't help but sigh in his heart when he looked at Ye Lingxian's delicate and pretty face and the cute and alluring blush on her face. What kind of power is behind Ye Lingxian? He can actually take out 500,000 spirit stones. By the way, Brother Mu should be more careful in the future. This time it will be fine because Senior Linglong is in Tianhe Garden, but if she is not here next time, it will be troublesome, Ye Lingxian suddenly reminded. Musian shook his head and said with a smile, Senior Linglong's absence will be fine. Senior Sister Lan had already reported Bai Ruoxi's matter to the sect leader. Since the other party made no move, it meant that they had acquiesced in the matter. The senior leaders of Lianji sect have already acquiesced to this matter, so what else are you worried about? From the beginning to the end, only the third prince felt that he was defeated only because of the spirit dragon. In fact, from the beginning, the third prince had no chance of winning this game. Musian gently touched Ye Lingxian's head and showed a standard warm smile, Lingxian, you are tired from accepting the inheritance these days. Go back and rest first. I will stew the 8 treasure crane later and give it to you. Yuan Qianer send it over. This is Tianhe Garden after all. Bai Ruoxi was meditating, but there was such a big commotion just now. It was impossible for her not to notice it. If we saw the scene after finishing the meditation, Musian, who was using head-touching kill on Ye Lingxian, and Bai Ruoxi, who was standing between the two of them, watching them. The standard Bai Shui scene should be avoided as much as possible. Meanwhile, on the other side, the eldest young master of the Mu family is not as simple as he appears on the surface. Yuzian, the leader of Daofeng, stood in mid-air and couldn't help but sigh with a bit of emotion. The strength is only the 5th level of Qi training, but the ability is outstanding. I just noticed that Wei Mengru, the maid of the Mu family, is also here. She is probably responsible for protecting his safety, Xiang Yan said. It stands to reason that after joining Liangyi sect, you no longer need to care about the identity of master and servant as before. Wei Mengru can follow him so wholeheartedly. I'm afraid she is really capable. Yuzian nodded slightly. And Senior Spirit Dragon is also there. When Yi Hao said this, he looked at the two of them and said, "You two, we should wait until at least the selection of the inner disciples is completed in 2 days' time." Regarding Senior Linglong, the two leaders both nodded and agreed with Yi Hao's words. The minds of the 3 leaders gradually became more active. They now have a huge advantage, that is, they know that Linglong and Muzian have a special relationship, which is information that the leaders of other main peaks do not have. He was recognized by Linglong and had a very good relationship with the geniuses they had chosen this time. This inner disciple really has to think carefully about how to choose. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 126. Huabao Feng. In front of the towering hall, the first one of Huabao Peak is standing high in front of the throne. Ren Kai-tai was originally the son of the queen mother of Dongzhou Yaokai. He joined the Liangyi sect 100 years ago and was appreciated by his first mentor, the first chief of Huabao Peak. 30 years ago, he succeeded the former chief and became the new chief of Huabao Peak. He is considered a monk with lower qualifications among several main peaks. However, in the last sect competition, Huabao Feng was ranked in the middle of the sect, and this year their goal is to be in the top 3. This goal is not difficult. As long as we recruit a disciple with suitable talent this time and train him well together with other disciples, it will not be difficult to shine in the sect competition. Among the disciples in this assessment, the geniuses in Tianqian City account for the majority. In fact, this is normal. After all, Tianqian City is located in a favorable location and is a place of outstanding people. However, I am afraid that all major peaks are preparing to make moves this time. If they fail to provide some appropriate benefits, I am afraid it will be difficult to recruit promising disciples in the inner disciple selection 2 days later. Huabao Peak can give you everything other main peaks can give, and Huabao Peak can also give you an exciting reward. The weapon spirit. Since the establishment of Huabao Peak, there are only a few weapon spirits that have been enlightened, and they are quite precious. But among the disciples who joined the sect this time, there were several geniuses who were worthy of being equipped with weapon spirits. Ren Kai-tai tapped his fingertips lightly on the edge of the chair, lost in thought. At this time, the deputy leader outside the house flew lightly from outside the palace door. Ren Kai-tai looked up and said with a smile, "Why do you have time to come here to see me in the palace today?" On weekdays, Ning Shuwen spent more time refining weapons on his own, or studying the method of instilling weapon spirits. There was not much time for communication between the two leaders. "Senior Spirit Dragon has appeared," Ning Shuwen said with a solemn face and a low voice. Ren Kai-tai smiled and said, "Senior Linglong doesn't appear once in a long time to give those sect disciples immortality. Who got the immortality this time? Bai Ruoxi, or Ye Lingxian?" Ning Shuwen shook his head slowly. "What I want to say is not this, but another thing." Under the gaze of the leader of Huabao Peak, Ning Shuwen spoke again, "Senior Linglong now lives in a certain little monk's villa." Ren Kai-tai's eyes slowly solidified and he said, "Who?" "Muzian." Ren Kaitai's eyes flashed slightly and he said, Senior Linglong lives at his place. After thinking for a moment, Ren Kaitai immediately said, is there anyone else who knows about this? The leaders of Daofeng, Chunyang Peak and Kanghai Peak are aware of this matter, but they should keep it secret for the time being. Ren Kaitai shook his head and said, it may not be possible to hide it. At least the library side will probably be the first to know. Both the library pavilion and the law enforcement hall are neutral, and the relationship between the two is quite good. Yan Ruyu rarely leaves the pavilion on weekdays, but she is aware of what is happening in the outside world. And this is some information sent to her by the agents of the law enforcement hall. We have to take action as soon as possible, Ren Kaitai thought to himself. Originally, the name Musian was not included in the quota for recruiting inner disciples. But if Musian was chosen by the spirit dragon, the meaning would be completely different. Looking at the leader with a thoughtful look on his face, Ning Shuwen hesitated for a moment, then said bravely, not long ago, the third prince went to the Liulai palace to cause trouble. The demon measuring ruler measured the traces on Senior Linglong's body. The evil spirit is shattered. Ren Kaitai suddenly came to his senses, raised his head suddenly, stared at the deputy chief, but did not speak for a long time. Although the two were the chief and deputy chief, their power was so different that Ren Kaitai's gaze at this moment made the deputy chief feel tremendous pressure. You gave him the power to search. Ren Kaitai stared at the deputy leader in the audience with burning eyes. I just think that if it is really a demon cultivator, there will be no loss for us if caught. But who knows, Senior Spirit Dragon will live there. A drop of cold sweat broke out on Ning Shuwen's forehead, and he quickly added, you can rest assured, Chief, Musian did not take the opportunity to complain. He only caused trouble for Ning Long. Hearing this, the leader with great power in the Liangyi sect softened his expression a little and said, this disciple is really good at behaving. You should prepare yourself in the next 2 days and take out 2 enlightened weapons from the arsenal. Weapons to prepare for the selection of inner disciples in 2 days. When it comes to magical weapons, no main peak can provide more and more luxury than their Huabao peak. 2 handfuls. Ning Shuwen hesitated for a moment and said, the first one, our main peak, doesn't only recruit 1 inner disciple? Could it be, who else do you have your eye on? When he said this, he seemed to think of a name, Musian. Seeing Ren Kaitai nodded slightly, Ning Shuwen said doubtfully, but isn't Musian a disciple of Kanghai Peak? After conducting the sect assessment at Kanghai Peak, one will naturally be a disciple of Kanghai Peak, unless he is selected by the top of other main peaks in the inner sect disciple selection 2 days later. Ren Kaitai slowly stood up and said with a smile, wouldn't it be better to dig him over? It has been more than 30 years since I succeeded to the throne of Huabao Peak and I have never made a mark. This time, it is time to recruit some fresh blood. The top 3 in the sect competition a few years later will receive a large amount of resources from the Presbyterian Council, and the top 3 will also receive an immortal fate. It is worth paying some price for this fairy fate. Senior Linling, this is the tenderest piece of meat from the Babao crane. Eat more of it? Musian returned to the villa, immediately prepared the stewed crane soup, and took the lead in bringing it into Linglong's room. Although Linglong didn't say anything this time, he didn't even do anything to help, but he made a great contribution. The shadow of the famous tree, a being like Spirit Dragon, does not even need to take the initiative to help Musian. As long as she stands there, even if she does not speak, she will make the leaders and elders in the sect feel awe from the bottom of their hearts. Senior is really in trouble this time. If it weren't for you, Ruoxi's side might really be in trouble. Musian looked at Linling, whose expression showed no change, and continued to speak. Linling held the bowl in both hands and sipped the crane soup, feeling the wonderful taste buds filling her mouth. She raised her finger and wrote on the table, it tastes great, there is progress. Musian smiled and said, after all, this is the second time to prepare ingredients like babao for seniors, so some progress is normal. When he said this, he changed the topic and said, Senior, it seems that every time Ruoxi is promoted to a level, a trace of demonic energy will leak out. Is there a solution? The higher Ruoxi's realm is, the more the three-tailed fox's bloodline will be awakened. Although it has been reported to the sect, the general environment is like this. If possible, it is best for others not to know about this matter. Lin Ling thought for a moment and wrote on the table, the nine-tailed fox will not be noticed by others. It's too difficult to be promoted to nine-tailed fox. Musian said with a helpless smile. By the time Ruoxi becomes a nine-tailed fox, I'm afraid she will have already reached enlightenment or even the Hedeo realm. By then, she won't have to worry about exposing her demonic aura at all. When he said this, he secretly observed Lin Ling a few times. She was holding a bowl at this time. She looked indifferent and her profile was flawless. She was just staring at the crane soup in the bowl with bright eyes, as if nothing could cause her to have emotional fluctuations. Musian suddenly reached out and grabbed the bowl in Lin Ling's hand, trying to take it away. Lin Ling turned her head slightly to look at Musian and tilted her head slightly. It sounds a bit like saying, little brother, are you drifting? As expected, this lady from the spiritual dragon is very protective of food. Musian smiled and said, it's okay, I just wanted to ask Senior if he would like another bowl of soup made by the 8 treasure crane. There was a glint in Lin Ling's eyes, and she pecked her head with AAA. Well, it's obvious that Lin Ling doesn't care about anything, at least she still cares about food. Musian had a deeper understanding of this mysterious spiritual dragon in the eyes of outsiders. After leaving the room and serving another bowl of crane soup for Lin Ling, Musian served another bowl of crane soup to Wei Mengru, and then took the opportunity to leave Tianhe Garden and visit the Biwen where the Ye family sisters lived. After entering the villa, after walking dozens of steps, I saw Ye Lingxian sitting in the courtyard drinking hot tea in the afternoon. She was holding a book in her hand. Under the sun, her snow-white skin seemed to be dyed with a layer of warmth. Gloss. Beside Ye Lingxian, the innocent and lovely Ye Qian was sitting on the edge, lying on the table with her head tilted and looking at her sister. Her towering breasts were pressed on the table to take a rest, and a small section of her snow-white calf was exposed under her skirt. The feet wearing light blue embroidered shoes are dangling. Lingxian, Qian Musian shouted, showing a sunny smile. Hearing the familiar voice, Ye Qian's eyes lit up slightly. He raised his head and looked at the young man standing not far away, and shouted softly, Brother Mu. Ye Lingxian was much more reserved, maintaining her usual elegance, as proud as a white swan, straightening her back, staring at him with sparkling eyes, and shouted, Mr. Mu. Brother Mu in private, young master in public, this girl Lingxian is really too proud. Musian walked up to the two of them and sat down with a smile on his face. Then, he took out 2 bowls of sealed crane soup from the Naja, placed it on the table, and said, have a try, I personally cooked this for you. Ye Lingxian's eyes narrowed slightly, and she glanced at Musian subconsciously, 8 treasure crane. Musian nodded slightly and said with a smile, drink it while it's hot. Maybe you'll have a chance to advance to a higher level today. Brother Mu, are you planning to go back? Ye Qian saw that Musian was still not seated, and immediately noticed what he was thinking, and was a little disappointed for a moment. Musian gently rubbed Ye Qian's head and said softly, after drinking the soup made by the 8 treasure crane, with your current state, there will be signs of breakthrough soon without any accident, and you will be the inner sect immediately. It's the disciple selection ceremony, and preparation is the most important thing. As for me. Mu Ji settled down for a moment, and when Ye Qian raised his head and looked up, he showed a kind and gentle smile like a big brother next door, and said softly, can Brother Mu still run away? Being stared at by Musian so intensely and feeling the warmth brought by his palms, Ye Qian lowered her eyes slightly shyly, and then said in a small voice. Musian looked at his sister who was sitting beside him again. Ya Lingxian just looked at him and then quickly withdrew her gaze as if she was electrocuted. Her expression seemed calm, but it seemed to contain something she had never seen in the past. Some mixed emotions. I'm going back first, Lingxian. Musian's voice came to his ears. Ya Lingxian raised his head slightly, and met Musian's affectionate gaze. A small ripple appeared in Gu Jing's calm state of mind. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article feed, placement, below article feed, target. Type, mix. If you don't want to leave, Brother Mu can stay with you. Musian continued to transmit the message, this time with a somewhat joking tone. Stop making such jokes, Mr. Mu, please come back. Ya Lingxian gave Musian an angry look, but in addition to resentment, there was a hint of charming affection in his eyes. And the original complexity in my heart seemed to be gradually filled with some kind of warmth. After returning to Tianhe Garden, Musian walked into a nearby pavilion and saw a cold beauty with a simple, elegant, and intellectual temperament. The background is a colorful grassland. Bairuoxi is wearing a plain white house dress, with her plump breasts standing out from the crowd of girls, holding a book in her hand and reading carefully. Her hair was simply pulled up with hostas, and the strands of hair were hanging down, which also added a bit of lazy fireworks. Cold and weak, like a reclusive young lady. Bairuoxi was cold and unattainable in front of outsiders. Only in front of Musian did the young lady show her weak side. With her breasts so big, can she really read the words on the scroll? Musian shouted, Ruoxi. Then, he brought 2 bowls of crane soup and came to Bairuoxi's side. Bairuoxi's bright and clear eyes, as bright as a cold pool, couldn't help but reveal tenderness when she saw the noble young master approaching. She stared intently, expressing her admiration, but she did not speak, retaining the reserve of a jade beauty. Girls are reserved. Even if they have practiced double cultivation several times, they will still be shy in broad daylight, let alone a beauty like Bairuoxi who has been trained in various etiquette since childhood. What are you reading? Musian glanced at the scroll in Bairuoxi's hand and asked in confusion. Unexpectedly, Bairuoxi reacted and seemed a little flustered. She quickly hid the book behind her back, then pretended that nothing happened, shook her head and said with a smile, it's just a book to kill time when you are tired from meditating and practicing. It's not worth mentioning. It's not worth mentioning why you hid it so closely, for fear of being seen by me. Musian looked at the book behind Bairuoxi suspiciously, and then smiled and said, since you don't want to talk about it, forget it, try this crane soup. Well, Senior Yihao only raised a dozen of them in total, and he cherished each one very much. There will probably be no such opportunity to eat the 8 treasure crane in the future, Musian continued. Bairuoxi nodded slightly, first quietly hid the scroll in the ring, and then picked up the 8 treasure crane soup and drank it gracefully. Musian looked at this cold beauty suspiciously, feeling that something was not right about Bairuoxi's expression. He didn't look carefully when he first arrived, but now he realized that Bairuoxi's face seemed to have a faint blush, which was quite attractive. Apparently, it must be related to the book she just read. However, everyone has some secrets that they don't want others to know, and Musian doesn't intend to get to the bottom of it. He also picked up the crane soup and enjoyed this luxurious lunch. After drinking the crane soup, Musian sat next to the girl. After being intimate with her for a while, Bairuoxi suddenly said with a bit of joy in her voice, I seem to be about to break through to the first level of refining the gods. When she said this, her smart eyes looked straight at Musian, as if waiting for his exclamation. Ruoxi is so awesome. Musian really praised him. Bairuoxi's brows relaxed a lot, but she proudly raised her white chin and pretended to calmly say So. She even pretended to be with me. Musian gently slapped the beauty's perky buttocks. The cold and weak beauty gave him a squeak, looked at him as if reproachfully, and said, "What are you doing?" He looked angry, but more of a shy person. Musian smiled and said nothing. So what if he is a second-grade god refiner, he still raises his hand to suppress it? But at this juncture, it's okay to be promoted to the second level of god refining, right? Bairuoxi suddenly asked worriedly. The third prince had just arrived with great fanfare not long ago, and now his promotion is likely to have demonic aura leaking out. Don't worry, Senior Linglong is here. Do you think anyone will doubt you? Musian said with a smile. Just like what he said before. No one will believe the story of the boy who cried wolf the second time. Bairuoxi gave a soft hum and glanced at Musian's hand that was wandering around her waist. Feeling helpless and shy, she said softly, "You let go first, I have to concentrate on breaking through and dealing with the catastrophe." Musian then reluctantly took back his hand. Alas, Bairuoxi is still too shy to unlock scenes in other places. Otherwise, getting intimate in the courtyard will actually give you a different experience. Musian looked at Bairuoxi's snow-white and beautiful profile and felt a little regretful. At this time, thunderclouds quietly gathered in the sky. Musian subconsciously looked up. Wei Mengru, who was wearing a yellow skirt, stood under the thunderclouds without knowing it. She stood with her sword behind her back, leaving only a command for people. The beautiful back view of people's reverie. Sister Mengru has also been promoted. At the same time, Musian also felt a spiritual energy from the outside gathering in his cauldron. The spiritual energy was very wonderful and had an indescribable wonderful feeling. This kind of beauty, if you have to describe it, is only slightly worse than when you were practicing dual cultivation with Bairuoxi. It's time to practice the 6th level of Qi. As expected of the 8 treasure crane, a treasure that can only be effective once for each monk, Musian and Bairuoxi looked at each other, and each returned to the room to deal with this breakthrough in the realm. The next morning. Library. This is one of the neutral forces of the Liangyi section. It can be said that more than 90% of the disciples of the sect have come here to check out books or obtain skills. At this time, Yan Ruyu, who was sitting in front of the 9th floor building of the library pavilion, wearing a light robe and outlining plump and attractive curves like a peach, was sitting on a chair, reading the letter sent by the spy not long ago. What was written in the envelope was all the experiences of the third prince who made a big fuss in Tianhe Garden yesterday. The envelope only recorded what he saw and heard, without expounding any personal opinions. This is the most basic personal accomplishment of a secret agent. The information sent must not have its own subjective thoughts, because it will interfere with its master's thinking. Yan Ruyu will naturally make a decision after reading the information. When she saw certain descriptions in the intelligence, Yan Ruyu's beautiful eyebrows frowned inadvertently. The deputy chief of Huabaofeng has a family relationship with the third prince. The third prince borrowed a demon measuring ruler from Ning Shuwen and even discovered the presence of demonic energy in Tianhe Garden. However, Ning Shuwen was persuaded to retreat not long after he launched the attack. Then, the 3 leaders entered Tianhe Garden one after another, and soon left as well. If there really are demon cultivators in Tianhe Garden, it doesn't make sense why they would stop here. But if there were no demon cultivators, why would the demon measuring ruler react? Yan Ruyu pondered for a long time and began to write a letter. Not long after, she folded a letter and handed it to the secret agent beside her. She smiled and said, "Send this letter to Tianhe Garden. Be sure not to let others notice it. Liulai Palace, Tianhe Garden." Musian quietly opened his eyes, feeling the unprecedentedly powerful spiritual energy in the cauldron, and felt refreshed. It's a pity that the 8 treasure cranes are only effective once for each monk. Otherwise, if one is used every day, he will not be directly promoted to the god refining realm. Musian sighed with some regret. He opened the door and felt the warmth of the sun shining on his body. He couldn't help but narrowed his eyes comfortably and glanced sideways at the maid in yellow skirt who was standing in front of the courtyard in a daze. Why does it feel like Sister Mengru has gotten bigger again? After Musian glanced at the back of the maid's sister, he glanced at the breasts that seemed to be a little bigger, and couldn't help but murmured in his heart. Wei Mengru seemed to feel something. She turned her head and looked at him expressionlessly, and said, "Where are you looking?" Musian didn't mind and said with a smile, "Sister Mengru, were you promoted to the 6th level of Shenlian yesterday?" Wei Mengru said lightly, "Yeah," hesitated for a moment, and said, "Thank you." Musian smiled, "If you really want to thank me, why not pledge yourself to me?" Wei Mengru glanced at him coldly and said calmly, "Get lost." Musian smiled and said nothing. This is like Sister Mengru. If one day Wei Mengru suddenly treated him tenderly, Musian would be a little uncomfortable with it. After all, I am used to being treated coldly by maids. At this time, Wei Mengru suddenly seemed to feel something, and raised her head to look at the secret agent walking quietly outside. The spy, covered with a black veil, quietly walked into the villa, came to Musian, and respectfully handed over an invitation letter. "Mr. Mu, Master Yan Pavilion invites you to sit in the library pavilion." Musian took the invitation, opened the envelope, took a quick look, and couldn't help but smile to himself. The selection ceremony will be 2 days later, but from the looks of it, the selection ceremony for the inner disciples has already started in advance. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 127. The third prince sat in the side hall. The tea in his hand had already gone cold. His face was extremely gloomy. It was no wonder, after all, that kind of thing just happened yesterday. That's a million spirit stones. Even if he was a prince, it would be very difficult to take out so many spirit stones at once. But now, due to the oath and face, he had to take out the spirit stones even if he had to swallow his teeth. However, if this practice were to spread, it would probably become a joke in the palace in the future. Even in the Lianji sect, there have been rumors that he slandered his fellow disciples in the past 2 days. Ming Ruoxi was originally a demon cultivator. Thinking back to what happened yesterday, and the face of Musian when he designed to frame him, the third prince's anger burned uncontrollably, and the strength of holding the teacup increased a little. Click. The surface of the teacup cracked slightly, and then the teacup was completely crushed in his hand, and the tea spilled on the ground. The third prince looked at the disciple who came in with an expressionless face and said, "What's the matter? Why are you still pretending to be like this?" The disciple was disdainful in his heart, but he was still respectful on the surface and said, "Your Highness, the letter we sent to the palace yesterday seems to be withdrawn in advance." The third prince was slightly stunned. After returning yesterday, the third prince had already written a letter to send it back to the Dogon dynasty overnight to his confidant, asking him to prepare 1,000,000 spirit stones. However, at this moment, this disciple said that the letter could be withdrawn. "What do you mean?" the third prince asked coldly without raising his head. "It is said that the princess left the palace 2 days ago and arrived at Lianji sect this morning. She seems to know what happened yesterday." The anger in the heart of the third prince was like being poured with cold water. He was stunned and murmured, "The royal sister is here." The princess of the Dogon dynasty has a good relationship with many people in Lianji section. She is also a teacher and friend to the pavilion master of the library. Both of them prefer poetry and books. The princess often visits Yan Ruyu in Lianji sect. This time she came here, probably to find the pavilion master Yan. As the princess, she probably has millions of spirit stones on her. If she finds the royal sister now, she can avoid the rumors in the palace in the future. After all, the royal sister is not the kind of person who talks nonsense everywhere. But if she finds her, will she really lend it? The third prince was born to the imperial concubine, while the princess is the daughter of the queen. The gap between the two is not small, and his relationship with the royal sister is very ordinary. If he went to find her, he might be scolded. The third prince looked unhappy and said in a deep voice, "Where is the imperial sister now? Someone saw her go to the library?" said the disciple. The third prince was silent for a moment and said, "Well, let's go to the library. By the way, Your Highness, the deputy chief specifically entrusted me to tell you, that Musian must not have any conflicts with him again." When the third prince just stood up, the disciple suddenly spoke again. The third prince's body stiffened slightly, looked at the disciple, and said in a deep voice, "Did the deputy chief tell you?" Seeing the disciple nodded slightly, the third prince's face suddenly darkened. It was obvious that Musian's mansion was secretly hiding a demon cultivator, but he was forced to hold his breath. Obviously, because of Ling Long, the uncle was also afraid. Even the other chiefs were the same. This is no wonder, after all, behind Musian is Ling Long. But a demon cultivator is a demon cultivator. If Bairuoxi's identity as a demon cultivator is confirmed, even if there is a spirit dragon, they can't lie with their eyes open, right? The third prince clenched his fist, waved the tea on his sleeves, and strode out of the side hall. After completing the corresponding procedures, Musian, under the guidance of the spy, walked up the stairs to the top floor of the library and met Yan Ruyu in the elegant hall. She was wearing a loose black robe and her hair was naturally scattered. At first glance, there seemed to be nothing eye-catching, but Musian, who had been among the flowers for many years in the past, could roughly guess what kind of charming and sexy curves this figure hidden under the black robe had. "Meet Pavilion Master Yan." Musian clasped his fists. Yan Ruyu raised her head and looked over, smiled slightly, and said, "Sit down." Her tone was quite gentle, without any airs of an elder, and her temperament was as intellectual as a female teacher. At this time, she looked at the little boy who had never spoken and seemed a little nervous in front of her with a gentle smile. "Don't be nervous, you have a good relationship with Bairuoxi who joined the sect this time, right? Just chat with her in the same way as you usually do with her," Yan Ruyu said gently. "I usually chat with Ruoxi in the bed and talk in detail." Musian maintained a humble attitude and said respectfully, "Seniors are seniors after all, and the proper respect should be shown, otherwise the juniors may feel uneasy." Musian paused and continued with reserve, "But when chatting with Pavilion Master Yan, it is really relaxing, just like talking to the sister next door." When he said this, he seemed to really think so, and couldn't help but sigh from the bottom of his heart. Yan Ruyu narrowed her eyes slightly and seemed to be very impressed by Musian's words. She poured him a cup of tea and said, "A lot of things happened in Tianhe Garden yesterday." Musian calmly took a sip of tea and sighed, "Actually, I just want to be a good person, but I will always encounter some troubles." Yan Ruyu nodded slightly. "Conflicts between disciples are inevitable, but there will be no fighting and killing in the sect like in the outside world." When she said this, she changed her voice and said, "In this selection of inner disciples, do you have any favorite main peak to choose?" Musian said with a helpless smile, "Senior is joking. With such qualifications as this junior, I am thankful to be selected. How can I think about choosing the main peak by myself?" Yan Ruyu smiled faintly. "In addition to the 9 main peaks, my place and the Law Enforcement Hall are also qualified to recruit inner disciples." There seemed to be some hints hidden in these words. But didn't this junior hear that senior hasn't taken the initiative to recruit inner disciples for a long time? Musian said in surprise. "The master of the library pavilion is a very Buddhist person and has little interest in sect competitions or even cultivating disciples. Over the years, while the major peaks have been arguing over quotas, her place has remained peaceful. But I never thought that the other party would have the idea of recruiting inner disciples this time. I haven't taken the initiative to recruit people for a long time, but that doesn't mean I don't have the idea of recruiting inner disciples now." Yan Ruyu sat upright, with a gentle smile on her face, and said, Junior sister Lan and I have a close relationship, and I trust her vision. All current signs indicate that Musian still has some big secrets, and these secrets even forced the three leaders who were present yesterday to pay attention. This news alone is enough to attract people's attention. If I can become an inner disciple of Kang's huge pavilion, I will definitely work hard for my senior. Musian immediately clasped his fists to show his loyalty. Yan Ruyu smiled sweetly, "Don't rush to answer, you can think about it carefully." She paused for a moment, then continued with the tone of concern from an elder to a younger generation. "After you become a disciple of the sect, you can go to the library pavilion to obtain a technique. You haven't been there yet?" Seeing Musian nod slightly, Yan Ruyu continued, "You can go to the third floor of the library pavilion and try it. If you find a technique that suits you, just reach out and pick it up. Consider it a meeting gift from me." Musian looked happy and said respectfully, "Thank you, senior." The master of the library pavilion may not be a great white shark like the sect master, but at least he is also a big fish. If Yan Ruyu's appearance and dress were placed in modern times, the most suitable person would probably be a female teacher holding a ruler, with a curvy figure and wearing gold-rimmed glasses. Her temperament and appearance are both top-notch. The only drawback is that her age may be several times that of Musian, but this is not a problem. After all, in the world of immortality, age is not a problem at all. Yan Ruyu smiled slightly and said, "Go." After saying that, he raised his hand and waved. Musian felt that everything in his field of vision suddenly seemed to be moving. One moment, he was still in the top floor hall of the library, but the next moment, he appeared in a place that looked quite empty. Occasionally, sect disciples could be seen in twos and threes, and occasionally jade slips, scrolls, and even parchment-like techniques appeared out of thin air, and then quickly passed by Musian's eyes and disappeared from sight. The sect disciples around them raised their hands to grab those skills from time to time, but most of them could only catch the shadow of an illusory skill. There are a large number of skills hidden in the 3 floors of the library, including many first-grade skills, which are the best skills that can accompany you throughout your life in the future. And all the disciples who enter the sect this time will have an opportunity to enter the library. But whether you can get the best skills depends on your luck. If you have enough luck, you can attract the best skills. This is also the reason why many monks want to obtain the inheritance of spiritual dragon's luck. After obtaining the inheritance of luck, it will be of great benefit to them in all kinds of cultivation on the path of immortality in the future. Of course, if you don't want the best skills, you can go to the skill area on the 2nd floor and choose your own skills. It's just that the skills stored on the 2nd floor are only up to the 6th level. The skills of the 5th level and even below can only be obtained by luck on the 3rd floor. At this time, a jade slip happened to pass by in front of his eyes. Musian stretched out his hand to grab it, but he easily caught it in his hand. Taking a closer look, there are 4 big characters written on it. 3rd grade Kung Fu. Musian was a little surprised. He grabbed another Kung Fu that passed by his eyes, but this time, like other disciples, he could only catch a shadow. His eyes flashed slightly, remembering Yan Ruyu's words just now, and he seemed to have thought of something. Throwing away the 3rd level skill in his hand, the skill disappeared into the air. Musian reached out to grab it again. This time I caught a skill very easily. Obviously, Yan Ruyu exerted some kind of permission on him, allowing him to get any skill he wanted on the 3rd floor. This woman is so generous. Musian clicked his tongue and secretly admired her. If this is put in reality, it is equivalent to the game official giving Musian a permission. This permission allows him to continue drawing alone until he draws the designated item he wants. But this favor is a bit big. Musian couldn't help but sigh again. Maybe for Yan Ruyu, this is just a piece of cake, but for Musian and even most of the disciples, this is a great favor. After all, getting a favorite technique will be of great help to one's future path of cultivation. It's a pity that Yan Ryu is like this, and there is probably no place for him to help for the time being. Well, if there is to be the only help, it is probably to pledge one's body. It's not that I'm lustful, but I feel that Pavilion Master Yan seems to be stuck in a certain level of the Return to Void Realm for a long time, and I want to help her. Muzian recalled Yan Ryu's graceful figure full of charm in his mind, and couldn't help but have a little more expectation in his heart. Next, Muzian stayed on the third floor of this library for nearly half an hour, constantly looking for his favorite technique. He also saw 2 or 3 third-grade techniques on the third floor of the library, but he had never seen second-grade or even first-grade techniques. The first and second grades are also called heavenly grades. Obviously, they are not cheap, so the probability of seeing heavenly grades is very small. It seems that it is good to get a third-grade skill this time, Muzian sighed in his heart. But it is still early now, so he can try his luck again. Maybe the next skill he gets will be a second grade or even a first grade skill. It is just like a lottery. I always think that I can win it next time, but in fact, I can't win it no matter how I draw. Fortunately, Muzian's lottery does not cost anything, so it doesn't matter. Soon, Muzian made a new discovery again. The skills he just threw away fell into the hands of other disciples not long after. In order to confirm this, Muzian tried several times and finally confirmed this conclusion. That is to say, the technique I threw away will not disappear immediately, but will continue to wander in this space for a while. Muzian looked at the several sect disciples present, all of whom had the techniques he had just thrown away in their hands. After selecting 7 or 8 techniques again, he was thinking about whether he should choose a more suitable third-grade technique and leave. At this time, Muzian suddenly felt a cold gaze staring at him. He turned his head slightly and saw Yayu. What a coincidence, Muzian waved at Yayu with a smile. But such an action was full of mockery in Yayu's eyes, so that he stared at Muzian with a little more hatred. But soon, Yayu suppressed his anger. The purpose of coming to the library this time was to obtain techniques. It was not wise to conflict with him here. What to do now is to strengthen your own strength. Thinking of this, Yayu no longer paid attention to Muzian. He held his breath and used his spiritual sense to search for nearby skills. At this moment, Yayu suddenly seemed to sense something, opened his eyes suddenly, and raised his hand to grab a scroll of skills in the air. His eyes lit up slightly, and he stared at the skills in his hand with great surprise. Second grade skills, Lone Star Sword. It has only been a short time since he arrived at the library, and he has already obtained a second grade skill. This is a person with great luck. There was a hint of surprise and hesitation in Yayu's eyes. The surprise was because of the second grade skills in front of him, and the hesitation was that he had just arrived at the library not long ago and wanted to see if there were any other suitable skills. Just at this moment, another skill quietly passed by. Yayu raised his hand again and grabbed it, but this time, the skills disappeared from his fingers like a phantom. What's going on? Yayu's eyes flickered slightly, and he just noticed the commotion not far away from him, and turned his head slightly to look. Muzian also had a set of skills in his hand, but he threw it away casually after just a glance, and then casually looked at the second grade skills in Yayu's hand for a few times, with disdain in his eyes. Muzian retracted his gaze, and then raised his hand again, grabbing the next set of skills in his hand. Yayu was stunned for a moment, his eyes flickered slightly, and he said to himself, it seems that everyone can only have one set of skills in their hands. Only after throwing away the skills in their hands can they get the next one. He made a prompt decision and threw away the second grade skills in his hand. Just at this time, another set of skills passed by in front of him, and Yayu quickly grabbed it. However, the moment he touched it, the skills were like a mirror flower and water moon. Although you can see it, you can't touch it, as if it doesn't exist in reality. What's going on? Yayu's face changed slightly, and he subconsciously turned his head to look at Musian, but saw that he raised his hand again and easily grabbed a set of skills. 4th grade skills. It seems that the higher the grade of the skills, the harder it is to get. He can only practice with this kind of skills. Yayu sneered secretly, no longer paying attention to Musian, but focusing on the skills that appeared in front of him from time to time. Next, Yayu relied on his great luck to grab 2 or 3 skills in succession, but they were all 4th grade to 5th grade skills, and even 3rd grade skills were rare. The 2nd grade skills I just threw away, is it already an extremely rare skills? Yayu's face became more and more ugly, and he finally realized the value of the skills he just threw away. It is obvious that these skills were attracted by his luck. The higher the luck, the more likely it is to attract high-grade skills. And the Lone Star Sword just now is probably the best skill that his great luck can attract. But he threw it away. When Yayu thought of this, he looked at Musian with more hatred. If it weren't for Musian's action just now, how could he throw away that skill for the time being? But fortunately, Musian's luck also couldn't attract high-grade skills. When Yayu just thought of this, he suddenly saw Musian raised his hand and grabbed it, and he just grabbed another skill. 2nd grade skill, Lone Star Sword. Musian glanced at the skill in his hand, and his eyes were more satisfied. Well, 2nd grade skill, it's enough. People still have to know how to be content. Yayu's expression froze slightly, staring at Musian, and a thought popped up in his mind, he just cheated me. Obviously, in this library, the 2nd grade skills are probably very precious. Yayu boasted that his great luck could attract more excellent skills, but now it seems that even people with great luck can hardly find 2nd grade skills, let alone 1st grade skills. However, he just threw away the Lone Star Sword, and it fell into Musian's hands. And why can Musian catch the skills so accurately every time, and never miss any? Yayu stared at the jade slip in Musian's hand. At this moment, there was only confusion and anger in his heart. In this area, who dares to guarantee that he can accurately catch the skills every time? There is no one. But only Musian can accurately catch the skills that pass by every time. This despicable villain obviously cheated secretly. Seeing that Musian was about to leave with the Lone Star Sword, Yayu's eyes were filled with anger. He stared at Musian's back and was about to speak to stop him. At this time, there was a slight commotion in the distance. Many disciples present looked over and saw 2 women walking towards the entrance of the 3rd floor. The leading woman was wearing a loose black robe, with a full and upright chest. A ribbon outlined her slender waist. Under the black robe, a pair of round and elastic long legs appeared vaguely, just outlining a curve that was extremely charming. She had a gentle smile on her face and looked around at the disciples around her. It was the owner of the library, Yan Ruyu. The other woman next to her was wearing a light golden long skirt. Such a dress might make ordinary women feel vulgar, but this woman easily controlled such a graceful dress, with 2 strands of fine hair falling on her delicate oval face. As she walked over, the golden hairpins on her hair swayed gently, sparkling and shining, showing the owner's noble status. She had a faint smile on her face, which made people feel friendly at first sight. The eldest princess of the Dogon dynasty, Yongning. Yayu's eyes were involuntarily attracted by this eldest princess. After staring at her for a moment, he suddenly woke up as if in a trance, and a bold guess came to his mind. He had heard these days that the owner of the library rarely left this place. Could it be that the owner saw through the cheating tricks that Musian secretly played here? Or maybe they were looking for Musian for something else? After all, the 3rd prince had just made a big fuss in Tianhe Garden yesterday. After all, the 3rd prince was also a member of the royal family. Maybe this eldest princess came to Musian because of this matter? Looking at the 2 women walking towards Musian, Yayu couldn't help but feel a little more expectant in his heart. If Musian really cheated, then I might still have a chance to regain the Lone Star Sword's skills. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 128. Who is the beauty next to Pavilion Master Yan? She always looks familiar. She must be destined to me. Musian looked at the two people approaching, his eyes sweeping over Yan Ruyu, who was as mature as a peach. Then, his eyes quickly fell on another woman next to Yan Ruyu. The body wrapped in the golden skirt outlines a sexy and plump curve, and the beautiful buttocks are tight. The slightly tight golden skirt also gives this woman a very alluring and voluptuous figure. The golden step on her hair added a bit of noble temperament to her. In this dress, she doesn't look like a disciple of the Liangyi sect, but rather like a princess who came from a certain royal family. Moreover, even an ordinary princess would find it difficult to control such a graceful and luxurious dress, but there is no sense of disobedience on her body, and on the contrary, it adds a bit of noble temperament. While Musian was speculating on the woman's identity, Yan Ruyu had already arrived in front of him, smiled slightly, and said through a message, "Have you found the technique you like?" Musian came back to his senses and replied respectfully, "I found it. Thank you for your kindness this time, senior. If there is any use to get this junior in the future, I will definitely go all out." Yan Ruyu smiled slightly and said, "Just find it?" She didn't particularly care about Musian's words. After all, the gap between the Void Returning Realm and the Qi Training Realm was really too big. At least in the next few decades, Musian would not be able to help her much. And if I have to say it, her only difficulty at the moment is the difficulty of being stuck in the third level of Void Return, and this happens to be something that cannot be solved by external forces. Perhaps sensing that Musian's eyes were on the eldest princess, Yan Ruyu smiled and said, "She is the eldest princess of the Dacian dynasty, Yongning. She occasionally comes to the library to chat with me about poetry and books." The eldest princess of the Dacian dynasty, the biological daughter of the emperor, Musian clasped his fists respectfully and said, "I, Musian, have met Princess Yongning." Princess Yongning smiled slightly and said, "Young Master Mu is a disciple of the Liangyi sect, so you don't have to be so formal." His tone and even his voice were crisp and pleasant, and he kept a gentle smile on his face, which made people feel good about him. This is a bit different from the royal family in my impression. If it were the third prince, he would have hummed arrogantly to express his nobility. Musian looked at Princess Yongning's gentle smile, smiling back. Yan Ruyu glanced at the empty hall and said, "This is not the place to talk. Let's change the venue." After finishing speaking, she waved her sleeves and disappeared to the third floor of the library with Musian and Yongning. Yu looked at the three people leaving and was slightly stunned. Even a fool can see that Pavilion Master Yan obviously has a very good relationship with Musian, not to mention that he uncovered Musian's cheating behavior. But that was a monk in the Return to Void realm. Why would you condescend to chat with a young monk in the Qi Training realm? Could it be that, Pavilion Master Yan took a fancy to Musian and wanted to recruit him as an inner disciple? This possibility popped up in Yu's mind, feeling a bit absurd and unbelievable. In the past, when he was in Tianqian City, Musian would be welcomed by the patriarchs or elders of the big families simply because he was the eldest son of the Mu family. No matter what level he was in, these senior officials would welcome him with a smile. But in Liangyi section, Musian's identity has no effect at all. What does Pavilion Master Yan see in him? A young monk with a 5th level of Qi training, but he was one step ahead of him and got the attention of the senior officials of Liangyi sect. Looking at the three people who had disappeared from sight, Yu pursed his lips tightly, feeling only indignation at the injustice in his heart. At this moment, a jade slip suddenly flashed past his eyes. He came back to his senses and quickly reached out to grab the jade slip. He successfully caught the jade slip in his hand. He glanced down. Another second level skill. Yayu's eyes were a little more excited and he licked his lips subconsciously. So what if Musian could cheat him out of his skills? His great luck can bring him the first second grade skill, and it can bring him the second one. As for the person who takes the back door, no matter how much he gets, he will only be exposed in the end. Near the library is a pavilion suspended in mid-air. When looking down from above, one can only barely see the bottomless abyss through the clouds and mist. At this moment, Musian was sitting at the tea table, looking at Yan Ruyu and the eldest princess with some emotion in his heart. I really didn't expect that the eldest princess of the Dakian dynasty had such a large network of connections. She even knew a few of the senior officials in the Lianji sect. As if aware of Musian's gaze, Yongning raised his head slightly, with a kind and gentle smile on his delicate face, and said, "Mr. Mu, is there something wrong?" Musian shook his head and smiled, "It's okay, I was just a little surprised. I didn't expect the two of you to be friends. Sister Yan and I are both teachers and friends. She has taught me a lot in a sense, she can be regarded as my mentor." Yongning raised his eyebrows slightly and said softly, "This time I came to Lianji Zone, I came to ask Sister Yan some questions." She paused and continued, "But after coming to the sect, I heard some things about yesterday. It just so happened that Sister Yan mentioned that Master Mu was also in the library, so she asked to meet you. What happened yesterday? Should she be referring to the trouble caused by the third prince?" Musian drank a sip of tea calmly, looked at the elegant and noble beauty, and smiled, "What does Princess Yongning think about this matter?" "I will pay back the 1,000,000 spiritual stones to Master Mu for him." Yongning smiled lightly. Well, although she always has a friendly smile, it seems that this princess is the type of domineering president. Musian had the first impression of Yongning in his heart. If placed in reality, Princess Yongning must be the president of the company. She always treats subordinates and even guests with a friendly smile, but she will be very strong when she needs to be strong. This kind of woman seems to be easy to approach, but in fact, it is very difficult to get close to her. Does Princess Yongning have a good relationship with the third prince? Musian asked. Yongning shook her head slightly and smiled, "I haven't said a few words to him. The whole palace is so big, except for the occasional banquets where the princes and princesses would have some exchanges, there would be no intersection at all. It seems that Princess Yongning is really a kind-hearted woman." Musian praised sincerely. Then, he looked at the ring on her slender hand. It doesn't matter who gives the money to Musian, as long as he can get the spirit stones. Princess Yongning shook her head and smiled, "Mr. Mu, don't worry. I will personally deliver the 1,000,000 spirit stones to Tianhe Garden within 2 days." When she said this, she raised her head and looked at the door of the library intentionally or unintentionally, and continued, "But not now." Musian turned his head and glanced behind him, but he happened to see the young man standing outside the library, wearing a 4-clawed python robe. The third prince, Ning Long. Musian calmly withdrew his gaze, smiled and nodded, "Okay, I'm not in a hurry." Princess Yongning had an average relationship with the third prince, but she was willing to pay him 1,000,000 spirit stones. If it wasn't out of kindness, it meant that she had her own purpose. Musian didn't know what the other party wanted, and he didn't need to care about such things. After all, in a complicated place like the royal family, it was normal for interpersonal relationships to be much more complicated than imagined. He just had to wait for good news in Tianhe Garden. 1,000,000 spirit stones, will all be paid by this eldest princess. After sitting in the pavilion for a while, looking at the third prince who seemed to be waiting for someone at the door of the library, Musian retracted his gaze and bowed to the two of them. "Master Yan, Princess, if there is nothing else, I will go back first." When he said this, he seemed to think of something, and suddenly said, "By the way, Master Yan, I wonder which floor of the library has books about formations." "You want to learn formations?" Yan Ruyu looked at Musian with doubt, and then remembered that day when Musian cracked the formation of the trial forest, and smiled and nodded, speaking of which, you do have some talent in formations. Later, I will ask someone to prepare a few suitable formation books and send them to Tianhe Garden to borrow for you to see. After saying that, she seemed to think of something and continued, I need to confirm the skills you got from the library earlier. Musian heard this and took out the Lone Star sword he had just obtained from the ring. Second grade skills. Princess Yangning's eyes were a little surprised, and she subconsciously looked at Musian. Yan Ruyu was also a little surprised, and couldn't help but look at Musian twice more. Originally, I thought that Musian was already good enough to get a third-grade technique, but I didn't expect that his luck would actually attract a second-grade technique. It seems that your luck is quite good. Yan Ruyu smiled and nodded, looking at this shy and modest boy, she was more pleasing to the eye. It just happened to get a second-grade technique, Musian said modestly. I happened to meet Yayu and took advantage of him. Yan Ruyu stretched out her hand to grab Musian's wrist, and her consciousness swept over him, recording the technique in his hand. If I remember correctly, Musian was still a 5th grade Qi training in the trial forest before, but now he is already a 6th grade Qi training. It seems that he is a good seedling with both talent and hard work. Yan Ruyu looked at Musian with a bit of admiration in her eyes, nodded slightly, and was about to retract her palm. At this time, her divine messenger seemed to notice something when he scanned Musian's cauldron, and couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, when he looked up at Musian again, there was a bit of strangeness in his eyes. But Yan Ruyu hid her inner surprise well in her heart, withdrew her palm, and smiled, it's enough. Musian said goodbye and left the sky court after hearing this. Yan Ruyu stared at Musian's back silently, her eyes flickered slightly. 2 cauldrons. Under normal circumstances, a cultivator can't have 2 cauldrons no matter what, because the spiritual energy can only condense 1 cauldron no matter what. There is only one situation where there can be 2 cauldrons. Musian is a natural cauldron. Yan Ruyu stared at the direction where Musian left, her eyes gradually became clear and relieved. Junior sister Lan might know about this, so she tried her best to conceal it. As for the reason, Yan Ruyu pursed her elastic lips, and her beautiful eyes became more meaningful. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 129. There are all kinds of physiques in this world, and these physiques will undoubtedly have a great amplification effect on the future path of cultivation for cultivators. Ya Lingxuan's natural spiritual body makes her naturally have an excellent affinity for spiritual energy. When refining various kinds of elixirs, she can have a more acute perception than ordinary alchemists and know when to control the temperature. Bairuoxi and Wei Mengru's physiques are also very special. The former can use the bronze sword left by a great ancient master, while the latter has a demon-like talent for cultivation and daunting bad luck. As for Musian, this one is even more heavyweight. The natural furnace has no amplification effect on one's own cultivation, but for others, it is more precious than natural materials and treasures. Yan Ruyu sat at the tea table, looking far away, staring at the direction where Musian left, with a glimmer of light in her eyes. The feeling just now is definitely not wrong, this Musian is definitely a natural furnace. That's why junior sister Lan cares so much about him. If other people knew about this, it would probably cause a lot of trouble, Yan Ruyu thought to herself. Sister Yan, what are you thinking about? A gentle, sweet, and crisp voice came from the side, pulling Yan Ruyu back to reality from her previous thoughts. She turned her head and met the beautiful eyes of Princess Yongning. The princess had a kind smile like a sister next door, which was most likely to attract the love of little boys. Yan Ruyu shook her head and smiled, it's okay, compared to this, Don't you plan to go over and take a look? When she said this, she glanced at the third prince standing at the door of the library. No hurry. Yongning raised her head and looked at the useless third prince, smiled and said, let him reflect on it alone first. Yan Ruyu was not interested in these royal family affairs, so she changed the subject and said, you came to see your sister this time, it should not be just for some poetry, right? Princess Yongning slightly turned her head to look at the black-robed beauty beside her, and smiled lightly, Sister Yan really knows me very well. In fact, this time my father appointed me to ask some questions. Yan Ruya showed a look of as expected, nodded, and said, you tell me. Why did the lifespan of the emperors in the world never exceed 100 years? Yongning raised his head and stared at Yan Ruyu, and asked softly. Normally, it is no problem for a cultivator in the Qi training realm to live for 200 years, but the emperors of the Dogon dynasty have been replaced for several generations, and every emperor has at least the Qi training realm, but they all naturally aged within 100 years. What Yongning's father, the current emperor of the Dogon dynasty, wants is the combination of immortal and emperor, not to grow old and die after 100 years. That's the way of heaven. Yan Ruyu smiled faintly and said, how can the luck of a country be so easy to bear? If your father asks you to ask, then tell him that the emperor and the monk cannot coexist. That's the way of heaven. Princess Yongning repeated softly, with a thoughtful look in her eyes. Yan Ruyu raised her head and looked in the direction where Musian had left before, seeming to be entangled. Senior, this is the skill that I have obtained. Please register it. Yu walked down the third floor of the library and said respectfully to the old man who was in charge of the door. The old man was dressed simply. He raised his head slightly and looked at it. He was surprised and said, second grade technique. Yu had a bit of pride in his eyes, but he didn't show it. He kept a humble attitude and said, it's just that I have better luck and I got it by chance. Although he said so, there was obviously a hint of pride in his eyes. This is not surprising. Even for people with great luck, it is very difficult to get a second grade technique. But not long after he entered the library, he got 2 second grade techniques. Such luck has surpassed other people with great luck by a lot. This is the great luck that only the chosen son can have. After taking out the sect token and handing it to the old man who was guarding the door, after registering, Yu saw a faint light on the sect token, which disappeared in a flash. He left the library with the second grade technique. At this time, 2 or 3 female disciples followed Yu and talked to him. It was obvious that they had just heard the old man's words and thought that this was a person worth making friends with. Yu smiled at the kindness of the female disciple and enjoyed the praise. At this time, an old sigh came from his body. Teacher, what's wrong? Yu responded in his heart. The Lone Star sword obtained by Musian is much better than the technique you got later. The old man sighed in his heart. Yu's heart sank, and he asked the teacher in his heart, the gap between the second grade techniques should not be very big. There will naturally not be much difference between the heavenly and heavenly grades, however, the Lone Star sword that Musian just took away can be evolved. Evolve. The future Lone Star sword may be able to evolve into a top heavenly grade technique. When the old man said this, he stopped talking and just sighed helplessly. His disciples' luck and even talent are excellent. Even after being cheated by Musian to take away a second grade technique, he still has such a strong luck to get the second grade technique. It's just that if you miss some opportunities, you've missed them. No matter how you try to save them, it won't help. And the other party may not know the evolution method of the Lone Star sword. This can be regarded as one of the few good news. But the indifferent smile on Yu's face just now became a bit more gloomy. Tianhe Garden. Musian returned to the mansion, holding the newly acquired Lone Star sword technique in his hand, studying it carefully. It has to be said that his talent is indeed good. After opening this second-level skill and memorizing the moves of the Lone Star sword in his mind, Less than an hour later, Muzian felt a sudden enlightenment. To put it bluntly, this technique is a bit like the bronze sword Byruoxi used that day. Concentrate and reach the top. After gathering the spiritual energy in it, with one strike of the sword, most of the spiritual energy in the cauldron was absorbed in an instant. The power is amazing, but the disadvantages are also obvious. Tomorrow is the selection of the inner disciples. Although I am quite confident, I still need to practice seriously. Muzian sat cross-legged on the bedside with his eyes slightly closed, about to carefully comprehend the mystery of this second-level technique. At this time, Byruoxi, who had just finished reading a volume of books outside, walked into the room. She was wearing a pair of light blue embroidered shoes. As soon as she opened the door, she saw Muzian sitting cross-legged on the bedside. The young man had a handsome face and graceful demeanor. In the eyes of Byruoxi in the past, Muzian was just a trash with a good skin, but now, when she looked at the handsome face of the young man, there was only emotional tenderness in her peach blossom eyes. Mulang. Byruoxi shouted softly. Let's talk later, I want to concentrate on my practice, Muzian replied seriously, concentrating on understanding the mystery of the Lone Star Sword. If you don't want to disturb, don't disturb. Why are you so fierce? Byruoxi pursed her lips in embarrassment, feeling unhappy. If ordinary people had such a beautiful Taoist companion, they would not be able to part with her all day long. Fortunately for Muzian, he has been so cold for a long time. Byruoxi looked at Muzian, who was comprehending the technique with his eyes closed, and silently withdrew his gaze, lying on the table and watching him in a daze. After nearly half a quarter of an hour, Muzian quietly opened his eyes, but the mystery brought by the Lone Star Sword was echoing in his mind. This technique is extremely destructive, but it needs to be used with caution. In addition, I still lack a handy weapon, Muzian secretly thought. At this moment, he only had the mystery of the Lone Star Sword in his mind. He looked at Byruoxi, who was sitting at the table in front of him. The beauty was wearing a white palace dress, with snow-white skin and loose hair. Because she was lying on the table, this action happened to make her breasts press on the table. This is something that only a woman with great tolerance can do, and it is quite tempting. They say they are called Ruoxi, but actually they can be called Naxi. Because she is so big. At this moment, the Lone Star Sword technique that had just echoed in his mind had been completely replaced by Byruoxi's figure. Muzian moved slightly, got up and got out of bed, came to Byruoxi's side, and grabbed one of her slender hands. What are you doing? Don't you, Mr. Mu, have to practice and have no time to pay attention to me? Byruoxi's cold face was calm, but her peach blossom eyes were full of resentment like a little girlfriend. Muzian stared at her and said seriously, Ruoxi, I was wrong. When he said this, his eyes were attracted by the unfathomable human heart. So big and white. Byruoxi noticed Muzian's eyes, her eyes flickered slightly, and said, You are just in the middle of practicing, and I really shouldn't disturb you, but if you want to apologize, can Mulang promise me something? Of course, for you, no matter how much I apologize, it's okay, Muzian said with an expression on his face. Then, there was a cool touch on his wrist, and he noticed the blind spot and said, Ruoxi, why are you using the concentric lock? Wait a moment, concentric lock lets you deal with the enemy, not me dash. After Muzian finished speaking, the concentric lock had already landed on his wrist. He sighed softly and said helplessly, Forget it, if this makes you happy, it doesn't matter. Muzian blew out the candle and looked at Byruoxi's cold face. She stared at Muzian with faint eyes, seemingly with a bit of expectation. Muzian could no longer bear it and said softly, Let's go to bed. Time flies, and another day has passed before I know it. The next morning, Muzian woke up early, and the concentric lock on his wrist had disappeared. He turned his head slightly and looked at Byruoxi, who seemed to be still sleeping soundly. This great beauty from Tianqian City was like a noble and holy snow lotus. She had experienced the ravages of the violent storm last night. At this time, her delicate and flawless face showed a faint blush, and she was a little charming in her holiness. It seems that a drop of sweat can be vaguely seen on the beautiful neck, sliding down the seductive collarbone and sinking into the skirt of the clothes. She gently held one of Musian's arms with both hands. The warmth in people's hearts made Musian narrow his eyes slightly. While enjoying it, he secretly shook his head and sighed. Musian, Musian, you can't continue to degenerate like this. Night is the time for meditation and cultivation. How can you degenerate like this every day? But actually there is nothing we can do about it. After all, this is also for the sake of Bairuoxi's cultivation. Today was the selection ceremony for the inner disciples, but it was still early for the gathering, so Musian did not wake Bairuoxi immediately, but quietly took his hand out of her arms and got out of bed quietly. Pushing open the door and feeling the sunshine on his face, Musian narrowed his eyes slightly and felt refreshed. Oh! Suddenly there was a cold snort that seemed to be disdainful. Musian looked sideways and saw that the maid with stunning appearance and graceful curves was leaning against the pillar in front of the pavilion. The chest rose. It's great to enjoy Sister Mengru's disdain early in the morning, Musian smiled and said, Sister Mengru, good morning. Why did you wake up so early? Are you too nervous thinking about today's selection of inner disciples? Musian continued to ask. Wei Mengru said coldly, I'm just worried that you guys went too far and missed the selection ceremony in the morning. She especially emphasized the word play and expressed her disdain in her words. What does it mean to play? I'm just fighting for Ruoxi's cultivation, Musian defended himself solemnly. Then, he looked Wei Mengru up and down and continued, actually, I can also help Sister Mengru, although I am a little tired. If it is for Sister Mengru, I don't mind no matter how hard it is. Wei Mengru looked at him sideways and was too lazy to talk to her young master. After a while, she suddenly asked, didn't I hear yesterday that the eldest princess would send millions of spiritual stones? Musian nodded slightly and said with a smile, I'll probably come to visit you in the next 2 days. As for now, let's get the quota of inner disciples first. When Wei Mengru heard this, she couldn't help but look at Musian twice and said, you look quite confident. This is the Lianji sect, not Tianqian City. Musian's identity does not have much effect here, and those leaders will only recruit inner sect disciples with excellent talents. If I can't become an inner disciple, I will have to rely on Sister Mengru to support me in the future. Musian sighed softly, looked up at Wei Mengru and said, Sister Mengru won't dislike me, right? Wei Mengru curled her lips and said calmly, young master is joking, I can't afford to support a person who has 2 legs. When she said this, Wei Mengru couldn't help but think about it for a moment. The positions between the two were exchanged, and Musian served her tea and water. I always find this picture a bit hard to imagine. Although he usually looks very shameless, my young master is still a very proud person at heart. Although she didn't know it, this person who was very proud at heart had fantasized about the wonderful future of being stepped on by his own maid more than once. To be honest, are you confident? Wei Mengru asked suddenly. If Musian cannot become an inner disciple, she will also not accept any invitation from the leader. Nature. Musian smiled lightly and said, so if the leader of a certain main peak invites Sister Mengru to be an inner disciple, I will accept it. When the sect competition comes, all the people from their side will be, it's quite interesting to think about it. As if feeling that Wei Mengru was still a little worried about him, Musian smiled and said, if nothing else happens, not only will I have a place as an inner disciple, but I will also have many choices. There are many geniuses this time, but the one who can play a role in the first place in a short period of time, or even for a long time in the future, is probably Musian. Coupled with the relationship between spiritual dragons. How to choose? After careful consideration in the past 2 days, those leaders probably already have the answer in their hearts. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 130. Pilgrimage Hall. On both sides of the huge square are peach blossoms that bloom all year round. When the wind blows, the peach forest sways gently, which is extremely beautiful. This place is also one of the most famous places in Lianji sect. The main reason is because of these peach blossoms and a legend circulating in the pilgrimage hall. I heard from the disciples in the sect these days that it is rumored that the Taoist couples who date in the pilgrimage hall can stay together forever in the future. Bai Ruoxi walked beside Musian, turned his head slightly to look at Musian, and said with a faint smile, "Mu Lang, let's come here together to relax next time." Who is so talkative about such unfounded rumors? Musian smiled and nodded and said, "Okay, I will accompany you then." When he said this, he suddenly remembered the paper crane he sent out 2 days ago and the content in the paper crane. It should be fine, after all, the great white shark like the sect master would definitely not date a little monk like him in the pilgrimage hall. But just in case, I'll go here with Ruoxi to relax and make an appointment. It's safer this way. As long as Bai Ruoxi's wish is fulfilled, with her personality, she will naturally not propose to come to the pilgrimage temple for a date. While thinking about this, Musian looked up at the disciples of the sect around him. Among these people, he saw many familiar faces. In addition to Huang Manting, there are Gongsun Chen, Yayu, and even the southern barbarian girl he saw in Linglong Cave Heavenly Palace that day. Her dress is different from that of the cultivators present, revealing a slender waist, a pair of straight legs under the skirt, and a pair of small short boots, full of exotic style. Well, this waist, these legs, and this face that is different from Dongzhou, it's simply amazing. Musian admired it for a moment and then retracted his gaze without leaving a trace. A qualified fish pond owner must know how to restrain his desires, especially when his lover is around. On the high platform, Yi Hao put his hands behind his back and looked down at the disciples below. His eyes swept over Musian, and then fell on Bai Ruoxi and Wei Mengru beside him. The monks gathered in front of the pilgrimage hall this time were all disciples who had just passed the sect assessment and joined the sect. The selection ceremony for inner disciples was postponed 2 days ago due to the order of the sect master, and today, the quota of 9 inner disciples will be decided. A tall monk in white stood in the air, with his hands behind his back, looking around at the disciples below, and said loudly, "The selection of inner disciples this time will be decided by the heads and elders of the 9 main peaks. All the disciples present who can pass the sect assessment are undoubtedly the best among the geniuses. If you fail to be selected as an inner disciple, you can also practice seriously for a few years. In the future, you will take the inner disciple assessment. After passing, you can also be promoted to inner disciples. In addition, in this inner disciple selection, you can go on stage to compete and show your own strength and talent." As soon as the voice fell, the atmosphere in the venue became lively, and many disciples had a fiery fighting spirit in their eyes. After showing your talents in front of the heads and elders, you may be directly selected and promoted to inner disciples. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If you miss it, you will have to wait for the inner disciple assessment later, but that will be a few years later. If possible, it is naturally best to be promoted to inner disciples this time. For a while, all the arenas in the pilgrimage hall were filled with disciples coming forward to compete with others. These disciples had more or less friction with each other during the sect assessment before, and this time was the best time to take revenge. Not only could they show themselves in front of the high-level members of the Lianji sect, but they could also take revenge, and they might even attract the favor of the female disciples below the stage, or even the female elders on the stage, killing 3 birds with 1 stone. If they could be favored by a female elder, this soft rice, tisk tisk, it was so delicious just thinking about it. Musian suddenly noticed a pair of hostile eyes looking straight at him, and raised his head slightly to see that it was the third prince who had just made a big fuss in Tianhe Garden 2 days ago. Not far from the third prince, a woman wearing a golden long skirt and with a protruding figure was chatting with the female cultivator next to her with a smile. Her face was extremely beautiful, revealing a noble and classical temperament like a queen. As she walked, the golden hairpin on her hair swayed gently. Princess, Yongning. Yongning noticed Musian's gaze and raised her head slightly. When she saw Musian, she said something to the female disciple beside her, and then walked towards Musian. Bairuoxi looked at Princess Yongning casually for a few times, then glanced at the young man beside her. Seeing that he looked indifferent and his eyes were clear and transparent, he did not miss Princess Yongning's beauty, so he withdrew his gaze with satisfaction. Musian smiled and said, "Princess Yongning, why are you here too? If I remember correctly, you don't seem to be a disciple of the section." Princess Yongning smiled faintly, "I just happened to catch up with the selection ceremony of the inner disciples, so I asked Sister Yan for permission, and after getting her permission, I came to take a look. Also, take a look at the geniuses of the Dogon dynasty in the past 2 years." Yongning inadvertently looked at the beautiful woman in a palace skirt with a clear and cold temperament, and said, "This is Bairuoxi, Miss Bai." "Hello." Princess Bairuoxi nodded slightly, revealing a reserved and polite smile. "This is Lianji sect, so you don't have to care about the etiquette of the outside world, Sister Ruoxi." Princess Yongning smiled and said, "I heard that Sister Ruoxi entered the sect without taking the test. So, you are already in the soul refining realm." "It's just that I'm lucky," Bairuoxi said modestly. "You can break through the chi refining realm at such a young age. This can't be explained by luck alone." After Princess Yongning finished speaking, she looked at Musian for a few more times and asked in confusion, "I heard that there is a maidservant beside Master Mu. Why didn't I see her today? Sister Mengru doesn't like to show her face." "I hope Princess Yongning doesn't mind." Musian smiled. Yongning couldn't help but feel a little disappointed when she heard this. She wanted to see what kind of enchanting talent this maid had, but since she refused to show her face, there was nothing she could do. "Imperial sister." At this time, the voice of the third prince suddenly came from a distance, and a handsome young man wearing a four-clawed python robe came to the front of several people. When he looked up at the imperial sister, besides awe in his eyes, there seemed to be a strange heat in the deepest part of his eyes. Princess Yongning just smiled and nodded to the third prince, but it was not difficult to see that her attitude was much colder. In fact, the eldest princess would not be so cold to the third prince at the beginning, but since the third prince asked her to borrow 1 million spirit stones yesterday, Princess Yongning's attitude seemed to be much colder. The third prince turned his head and looked at Musian, with a bit of coldness in his eyes. Musian didn't seem to mind, and smiled at him and said, "Third prince, good morning." The third prince sneered, "Master Mu, stop being so hypocritical. I know exactly what you are thinking." Musian said in embarrassment, "Third prince, we are all disciples of the section. There is no deep hatred. There is no need to be like this." Princess Yongning raised her eyebrows slightly and nodded slightly, saying, "Mr. Mu is right. You are all disciples of the section. You will be in the same sect for a long time in the future. You shouldn't be so tense." The third prince suddenly raised his head and looked at Princess Yongning, saying, "Royal sister, this guy is just a despicable villain who only knows how to cheat." And Bairuoxi, he actually dared to bring Bairuoxi directly to the pilgrimage hall, so that her true identity would not be exposed. Musian sighed and said, "Third prince, I don't seem to have provoked you from the beginning to the end, right? I have been passively counter-attacking all the time. Is this wrong?" Although Musian did play tricks on the third prince a few times, it was purely because the third prince provoked Musian first. Perhaps in the eyes of the third prince, who had been pampered since childhood, Musian was just an ant that could be crushed to death at any time. However, he did not realize that this was no longer the Dogon dynasty, but the Lianji sect. In the Lianji sect, the identities of princes and princesses were all useless. The third prince stared at Musian and said coldly, "Master Mu, do you dare to fight with me in front of the arena?" Bairuoxi frowned slightly and said lightly, "If the third prince wants to compete, I can come and try with you." The third prince did not even look at Bairuoxi, staring at Musian, and said, "You want to hide behind a woman?" "I am hiding behind a woman, what can you do?" Musian shook his head and chuckled. He added, "I am hiding behind a woman, but can you beat her?" The third prince said angrily, "Bairuoxi is in the realm of refining spirits. I can't beat her, can you beat her?" "I can suppress Ruoxi by raising my hand," Musian said lightly with his hands behind his back. Bairuoxi's pretty face flushed slightly, and she glared at Musian. Seeing the third prince's angry face, Musian smiled and said, "If you don't believe me, let's bet another 1,000,000 spirit stones to see if I can suppress her." Looking at the third prince, who seemed to be a little angry, Musian thought for a moment and smiled, "Well, since the third prince wants to seek revenge on me, I'll give you this opportunity." When he said this, he noticed that there seemed to be a few eyes staring at him in the crowd. Musian couldn't help shaking his head and chuckled, "It seems that I am as popular as Ruoxi. Although the former is because of her beauty and talent, and he is simply hated by some people. This is also something that can't be helped. Anyway, no matter what you do, there will always be people who hate you and envy you." Musian didn't plan to change his style for these people. These people usually see him eating soft rice every now and then. Don't they really think he is weak? Aware of the eyes of some people in the crowd, Musian chuckled secretly. "In this case, this time, give them a chance."